A $50 million deal. A hidden betrayal buried inside 80 pages of legal language. And the only person in the room who could see it coming was the quiet girl carrying water glasses in the corner. Nobody looked at her twice. That was their first mistake. What happened inside that private dining room at the Wellington Hotel on a freezing Tuesday night in February would destroy one man's career, save another man's company, and change two broken lives in ways that none of them, not even her, could have predicted. This is that story. If this kind of story hits you somewhere deep, drop a like and tell me in the comments. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, all the way to the end. The Wellington Hotel had a reputation for discretion. That was the whole point of the place. Not the marble floors imported from a quarry outside Florence, not the chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls, not the sommelier who could recite vintage years the way other people recited phone numbers. The point was that powerful people could conduct the kind of business inside these walls that never needed to appear in any newspaper, and the staff understood that seeing nothing, hearing nothing, and remembering nothing were the three most valuable skills they could bring to work. Lily Harper had worked here for 4 years. She was good at all three. She was also, on this particular Tuesday night in February, running on 5 hours of sleep, a gas station coffee she'd bought at 6 in the morning, and the specific brand of quiet exhaustion that comes not from laziness, but from carrying too much for too long without anyone noticing the weight. She had picked up an extra shift. Again. Her sister Maya's spring semester tuition was due in 11 days, and the math had not worked out favorably, no matter how many times Lily had run it on the calculator app on her cracked phone screen. So here she was, black uniform pressed, hair pulled back, invisible in the way that good waitstaff are trained to be invisible, present enough to anticipate, absent enough to never intrude. The private dining room on the 14th floor had been booked under a corporate account registered to a company called Callaway Dynamics, LLC. Lily had seen the name before, seen the reservation notes. High-profile dinner. 12 place settings requested, though only 3 were ultimately confirmed. Special handling required. The manager, Mr. Fenton, had pulled 3 of his most reliable staff for the room and briefed them that morning with the specific energy of a man who was slightly frightened of the guests. "No mistakes tonight," he'd said, looking mostly at Lily when he said it, which she found unfair since she had never actually made a mistake that mattered. She'd nodded and said nothing. She was practiced at that. Sulk. By 8:15, 2 of the 3 confirmed guests had arrived. Lily watched them from her station near the service entrance, the way she always watched, quietly, cataloging details out of habit or instinct. She was never quite sure which. The first man she recognized from the business section of a magazine she'd once read while waiting for the subway. Ethan Callaway. 32 years old, tech billionaire, founder of an AI logistics company that had, by all visible accounts, been doing extraordinary things until very recently when it quietly stopped doing extraordinary things and started doing the kinds of things that companies did right before they needed someone else's money very badly. He was taller than the magazine photo suggested, lean in the way that people get lean when they forget to eat because they're working, not because they're trying to look a certain way. His suit was excellent. Dark navy, clearly made for him specifically, no off-the-rack symmetry. But he wore it like a man who had dressed in a hurry, or who simply didn't think about his appearance as a separate category from the rest of his life. His jaw was set tight. His eyes moved around the room in the specific pattern of someone who was calculating risk and not finding the numbers encouraging. He checked his phone twice before he sat down. Both times the same way. Thumb to the screen, brief scan, screen dark again. Not messages. Something else. Maybe his daughter. Lily had heard, the way you hear things in service work without trying, that he had a little girl, 7 years old, that his wife had died, that he had raised the child alone while building a company from scratch, that he had not, as far as anyone could publicly observe, taken a vacation or a personal day in the past 3 years. Looking at him now, she believed it. The second man was named Damian Pierce. Lily knew this because he had handed her his coat upon entering the room as though she were a coat rack that happened to be shaped like a person, and said his name while doing it, not as an introduction, but as a kind of announcement. "I am Damian Pierce. Handle my belongings accordingly." His coat was cashmere. His watch was the kind that people bought to make other people ask about it. He was around 40, The kind of man whose handsomeness had once been genuine and was now maintained through considerable effort and considerable vanity about that effort. He sat across from Ethan and immediately began talking. The kind of talking that wasn't conversation. It was performance. He gestured a lot. He said the word leverage 4 times in the first 3 minutes. He said frankly before statements that were anything but frank. Ethan listened, nodded occasionally, said very little. Lily had spent enough time in rooms like this to know that the dynamic between these two men was not equal, and that Damian Pierce either did not know this or did not care. The third guest had not yet arrived. Her name was Naomi Takeda. Lily knew the name the moment she saw it on the room reservation sheet that afternoon, and something in her chest had done a small involuntary thing, a kind of tightening or recognition. Naomi Takeda was not a name you forgot if you had grown up in certain circles or read certain business publications or spent any time at all in Osaka, Japan between the ages of 8 and 16, which Lily had. Naomi Takeda was 61 years old and had built 3 separate billion-dollar enterprises from the ground up across 4 decades. She was known in Japanese business culture with a specific combination of reverence and fear that Lily had no direct English translation for, though formidable came close, if you understood that formidable in this context meant something closer to inevitable. The sense that when Naomi Takeda decided something was going to happen, the universe generally made the necessary adjustments. She was also, and this was the detail that Lily noted with a rising sense of dread for the 2 men already seated in the room, deeply, almost constitutionally committed to the codes of formal Japanese business etiquette, not as performance, not as preference, as principle. The exchange of business cards conducted with 2 hands and a slight bow. The hierarchy of speech. The careful architecture of respect that ran underneath every business conversation like a structural beam, invisible until it was damaged, at which point the whole building became unstable very quickly. Lily looked at Damian Pierce, who was currently leaning back in his chair with one arm thrown over the back of it, talking about his golf handicap. She felt the first cold finger of something like premonition. Naomi Takeda arrived at 8:40. She was smaller than her reputation. This surprised people who met her for the first time. Lily had heard this said about her, and now she understood it. Naomi was perhaps 5'2", slender, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that was simple enough to be invisible and expensive enough to be unmistakable. Her hair was silver and cut precisely. Her face was composed in the specific way of someone who had spent decades deciding exactly how much of their interior life to make available to other people, and had landed on a number close to 0. She walked into the room with 2 members of her own staff, a young woman carrying a leather portfolio and a man in his 30s who Lily would later learn was supposed to be her interpreter. Was supposed to be. The man stopped at the door, exchanged a rapid, quiet exchange with the young woman. His face went through several expressions in quick succession, none of them good. Then he looked at Naomi and said something low and apologetic that Lily couldn't hear from across the room. Naomi's expression did not change. That, somehow, was worse than if it had. She dismissed both of them with a single small gesture, not angry, not dramatic, the way you might swat a fly that had already left the room, and walked toward the table alone. The interpreter was gone. The dinner was beginning. Lily watched Ethan stand up quickly to greet Naomi and noticed the exact moment he registered that the interpreter wasn't there. His eyes swept the room, found nothing. Came back to Naomi, who was extending her hand with a slight formality that he clearly recognized as culturally significant, which was something at least, because Damian Pierce had already stuck out his right hand for a pumping American handshake before Ethan could redirect him. Naomi shook it. Her face revealed nothing. The temperature in the room, which had been perfectly regulated by the Wellington's climate control system, seemed to drop about 3 degrees. Lily moved through the room with the trained unobtrusiveness of her 4 years at the Wellington, pouring water, adjusting napkins, being useful in the small ways that her job required. She listened, not deliberately, not at first, the way anyone listens when they are in close proximity to a conversation. What she observed made her stomach tighten. The meal had barely started and Ethan was already navigating a minefield without a map. He had pulled out his phone and opened a translation app. This was Lily knew with the certainty of someone who had grown up bilingual in a culture where the how of communication mattered as much as the what, exactly the wrong move. Not because it wouldn't work mechanically, translation apps could produce serviceable sentences, but because using one in a formal business setting with someone of Naomi's standing communicated something specific and unwelcome. I didn't think you were worth preparing for. Naomi watched the phone come out. Something behind her eyes adjusted. Ethan, to his credit, seemed to sense this wasn't working well. His jaw tightened. He set the phone down and tried a more direct approach, speaking slowly and clearly, which was better than the phone, but still left massive amounts of professional nuance evaporating in the gap between English and Japanese. Damian Pierce had no such concerns. Damian Pierce, it was becoming clear to Lily as she moved quietly around the room, did not speak any Japanese, had apparently not researched the cultural context of this meeting in any meaningful way, and operated on the conviction, common among a specific species of American businessman, that confidence was itself a kind of translation. He leaned forward on the table, both elbows, a posture that communicated to anyone who knew the specific disrespect of informality in a situation that demanded its opposite. "Look," he said, "I know the numbers look complicated on paper, but the bottom line is simple. This is a ground floor opportunity on a company that's already demonstrated viability in 3 major markets. What Ethan's built here," he gestured broadly at Ethan, "is the kind of infrastructure that doesn't come along twice." Ethan translated this through the phone app. The result came back in Japanese that was linguistically functional but culturally stripped, like the skeleton of a sentence with all the muscle and context removed. Naomi listened to the translation. Her expression was unreadable. Damian kept going. "The hesitation I'm sensing," he said, and at this point Lily had paused near the credenza because something in the way he said this made her go very still. "And I say this with full respect, because I think there's a cultural element here, is maybe about comfort with American-style growth models, which is totally understandable. The Japanese market has a different risk appetite." He smiled when he said it, the particular smile of a man who believed he was being gracious. Lily looked at Naomi. Naomi Takeda had built 3 companies across 4 decades. She had negotiated with finance ministers and tech oligarchs and government officials on 3 continents. She had been told, at various points in her career by various men, that her hesitation was cultural, that her caution was risk aversion, that her instincts were not quite suited to the way things worked in this market. She was still here. They were mostly not. Her face showed nothing, but something in the quality of her silence changed, the way the air changes a fraction of a second before it starts to rain. Not visible, just different. Lily felt it. She didn't think Damian Pierce felt it at all. The appetizers arrived. Lily served them. The conversation continued, and as it continued, Lily found herself doing something she almost never let herself do at work. She stopped being invisible and started paying close attention. Naomi spoke only occasionally, in Japanese, and when she did, the phone translation mangled the register so badly that what came through as "the terms require clarification" was actually, Lily knew, something closer to, "I find the structure of this proposal deeply inadequate, and I question whether we share the same understanding of what this partnership would require." The difference was not small. The difference was the entire deal. Ethan was sharp enough to know something was being lost in translation. She could see it in how he watched Naomi's face, trying to read the emotional content that the words weren't carrying. He asked careful questions. He listened well. For a man conducting a meeting he clearly wasn't prepared to conduct in the most important language in the room, he was doing the best he could. Damian Pierce was conducting an entirely different meeting in his head, one that was going much better. "I've got the contract documentation here," Damian said at one point, producing a leather-bound folder from his bag with the specific flourish of someone who had practiced that gesture in the mirror. "We can walk through the key clauses tonight, get Naomi's team to review the details, and have something in principle by end of week." He slid the folder across the table. Lily was refilling water glasses near the table's edge. She was close enough to see Naomi open the folder and begin reading. She was close enough to watch Naomi's hand stop moving. It was a small thing, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you were watching closely, or if you'd spent years learning to read the tiny physical signals people gave off when something went wrong. Naomi's hands, which had been turning pages with the practiced efficiency of someone used to reviewing documents quickly, simply stopped. 1 second, 2, 3. Then she continued, her face showing nothing, and Lily moved away from the table and went back to her station and tried to name the feeling crawling up the back of her neck. The main course came and went. Lily watched Damien grow louder as the evening progressed. Not drunk exactly, he'd had only 1 glass of wine, but looser, more expansive, more certain. He was telling a story now about a deal he'd closed in Singapore that involved a government minister and a misunderstanding at a golf resort that had apparently resolved itself through the power of his own personality. He told this story directly at Naomi. He paused in the right places for laughter. Naomi did not laugh. Ethan looked at his phone. Lily thought, from a distance, that the message he was reading might be from his daughter. Something in the way his expression shifted, briefly, into something softer before it closed again, like a door opening and quickly shutting. And then Damien Pierce said the thing. Lily was at the service station, 12 feet from the table. She heard it clearly. She wasn't sure Ethan caught it because Ethan was still looking at his phone, and the way Damien said it was quiet enough to be deniable but loud enough to be heard if you were paying attention. He was talking to the other man on his team, a young associate who had been mostly silent all evening. And he said, low and dismissive, with the specific casualness of someone who assumed certain things were simply understood. This is going to be a slog. She's being difficult. They get like this when they can't control the room. They. Lily went completely still. The associate looked uncomfortable, said nothing. Lily looked at Naomi. Naomi was looking at the menu. Her face showed nothing, but her hands, folded on the table, had gone very slightly rigid in the way of someone who has heard something they chose, for reasons of their own, not to visibly react to. She understood English. Lily had not been certain of this before. She was certain now. Naomi Takeda had understood every word Damien Pierce had said all evening, including the Singapore story, including the comment about risk appetite, including the thing he'd just said to his associate. She had simply declined to speak it. There were reasons to do that. Political reasons. Strategic reasons. Personal reasons. The particular choice of someone who wanted to know what people said when they thought you couldn't understand before deciding whether to trust them with anything of value. Looking at Naomi's hands on the table, Lily thought, she's deciding right now whether to walk out. And then she looked at Ethan Calloway, at the tension in his shoulders, at the folder sitting on the table in front of Naomi, at the thing she had noticed when Naomi's hands stopped moving while reading the contract. And something inside her did a slow, awful calculation. She had seen this before, not in this room, not with these people, but the shape of it, the hidden clause, the partner who talked too much, the document that looked like an opportunity but was something else entirely. She had seen this before in the most specific, most personal way a person can see a thing, her father's business. The men who had come with contracts and smiles. The clause buried 30 pages in that had quietly signed away everything he'd spent 15 years building. The phone call that had come on a Thursday morning when Lily was 17, and her mother had sat down in the kitchen with the specific heaviness of someone who understood that everything was different now. Her father had never recovered, not really. Looking at Ethan Calloway, this quiet, tired man who had buried his wife and raised his daughter alone and built something from nothing, who was currently being navigated into a disaster by the man sitting 3 feet away from him. Lily felt something in her chest that she didn't have a clean name for. It was not pity, it was not heroism. It was more complicated than either of those. It was the feeling of recognizing a cliff in the dark and having the specific, terrible knowledge that someone you don't know is walking toward it. Her hands were shaking slightly when she set down the water pitcher. She took a breath. She did not step forward. Not yet. Because stepping forward meant risking everything she had. Her job, the shift income, Maya's tuition, the thin, careful life she had constructed. For strangers in a room where she was supposed to be invisible. She stood at her station and watched and waited and told herself she was going to stay exactly where she was. And then Damien Pierce leaned across the table toward Naomi and said, in the cheerful voice of a man closing a deal he considered already closed, "So, are we ready to move this forward? I think we've covered all the bases. Ethan's prepared to commit to the framework tonight if you are." Naomi looked at him. Then she looked at the contract folder. Then she looked at Lily. It was brief. The look lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but it was direct, and it was certain, and it was the look of someone who had understood exactly where the only honest person in the room was standing. Lily met her eyes. Naomi held her gaze for one long moment. Then she looked back at the table, and Lily, standing 12 feet away in her pressed black uniform, with her heart pounding and her hands still, thought, "She knows. She knows I understand her, and she's waiting to see what I do about it." Finally, the decision didn't feel like a decision. That was the thing Lily would think about later, in the weeks and months that followed, when people asked her why she did it. It didn't feel like courage. It didn't feel like calculation. It felt mostly like the thing that happens when you've been holding your breath for a long time, and you simply stop. She set down the water pitcher. She walked to the table. She stopped beside Naomi Takeda's chair, turned to face the table, and bowed. Not the shallow nod that Americans sometimes used as a gesture of vague Asian acknowledgement, but a proper bow, angled precisely, held for the correct count of seconds, the kind that said, "I understand where you come from, and I am addressing you accordingly." Then she straightened and spoke in Japanese, formal Japanese, business-registered Japanese, the kind she had learned growing up in Osaka between the ages of 8 and 15, in a household where her father ran a small import business and received Japanese clients at the dinner table, and had taught both his children that language was not just communication, but relationship, and that how you spoke to someone told them everything about whether they could trust you. She said, "I apologize for the interruption, Takeda-san. My name is Lily Harper. I was born in Osaka. If it would be of service, I would be honored to assist with translation for the remainder of this evening." The room went absolutely silent, not the polite quiet of a room between sentences. The specific silence that happens when something occurs that nobody had predicted and everyone is recalibrating. Damian Pierce's mouth was slightly open. Ethan had gone very still. Naomi Takeda looked at Lily for a long moment with the measured attention of someone who was evaluating several things simultaneously. Then, for the first time since she had entered the room that evening, something in her expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the specific movement of someone setting down something they had been prepared to use as a weapon. She said, in Japanese, "Your Osaka accent is from the Namba district. How long did you live there?" Lily's heart was pounding so hard she was mildly surprised it wasn't audible. She said, "From age 8 to 15, Takeda-san. My father had a small business there. He worked with Japanese import clients." A pause. Then Naomi said, in the careful way of someone asking a question they already know the answer to, "And your father, is his business still operating?" Something moved through Lily's chest, not painful, exactly, just present. She said, "No, Takeda-san, it is not." Naomi looked at her for another moment. Then she looked at Ethan. She said, in Japanese, and Lily translated this immediately, clearly, without softening it. "I will continue this dinner, but from this point forward, I will speak only through this woman." Ethan looked at Lily. Later, much later, when they were further from this night, he would tell her that the moment he looked at her properly for the first time, standing at his table in her Wellington uniform, he thought two things in quick succession. The first was, "She's been here all evening and I never actually saw her." The second was, "She just saved the entire room." What he said out loud in the moment was less articulate. He said, Okay, yes, of course." And then catching himself, catching the inadequacy of that, "Thank you, I mean that, thank you." Lily nodded once. She did not smile. This was not a smiling moment. She pulled the empty chair from the end of the table, the fourth seat, the one that had been set for a guest who never arrived, and positioned it carefully at the corner, equidistant between Ethan and Naomi, where a translator would sit. Not at the table, precisely. Not removed from it, either. She sat down. Damian Pierce, across the table, was looking at her with the expression of a man who had just discovered that someone had rearranged his house while he was sleeping. The objects were all there, but the arrangement was wrong. Whoa, he said. "Let's just... Who authorized this? She's the waitress." He looked at Ethan. "Ethan, come on. We don't know this person. We can't just..." "She speaks Japanese," Ethan said. Flat, final. "We don't know how well she speaks. Takeda-san just said she'll only continue through Lily." Ethan looked at Damien with an expression that Lily would later describe as the moment the room reorganized. So unless you'd like to continue this dinner in silence, I suggest we move forward. Damien's jaw tightened. He sat back. He looked at Lily with an expression she recognized. She had seen variations of it her entire working life, aimed at her from across dining rooms and conference rooms and every kind of room where she was supposed to be present but not significant. It was the look of someone recalculating a threat level. She met his eyes. Then she looked away because she had work to do. The translation began, and almost immediately Lily understood that this was going to be complicated. Not because of the language. Her Japanese was good, better than good. She knew that, had always known it, had kept it exercised over years through books and films, and the specific stubbornness of someone who refuses to let go of a piece of themselves. She moved between English and Japanese with the easy fluency of someone who had grown up thinking in both. No. The complication was what she was translating. Naomi, now that she had a proper translator, spoke with considerably more directness. She asked precise questions about the company's financial structure. She asked about the debt-to-equity ratio on Ethan's current operating model. She asked about 3 specific clauses in the contract that she wanted explained. Not translated, explained, which was different and more demanding. Lily translated everything faithfully, both directions. As she translated, she read. Naomi had left the contract folder open on the table. As Lily worked through the conversation, her eyes moved across the pages. Not trying to read the whole document, just tracking the sections that Naomi's questions were circling, the areas of the contract that were attracting the specific careful attention of a woman who had spent 40 years learning which parts of documents were designed to be overlooked. And then Lily's eyes stopped. Clause 14, B. Subsection 3. She read it twice, then a third time, slowly, parsing the legal language the way her father had once tried to teach her to parse contracts, with the understanding that legal language was not designed for clarity. It was designed for the specific kind of obscurity that allowed the writer to later say it was all right there in the document. It took her approximately 45 seconds to understand what she was looking at. Then she sat very still for a moment, her face careful, her hands folded in her lap, and thought about what she was going to do. What Clause 14(b), subsection 3 stated, in language dense enough to be easily glossed over during a quick read, buried at the back of the contract's 3rd section, surrounded by boilerplate language that was genuinely unremarkable, was this: that in the event of the partnership proceeding to investment, Naomi Takeda's capital would be structured not as equity investment, but as a debt instrument, secured against the operational assets of Callaway Dynamics. The repayment terms were buried in an appendix that Lily's eyes found almost immediately once she knew what she was looking for. The interest rate was not what had been verbally discussed. The personal guarantee clause, 3 paragraphs that would bind Naomi personally, not merely her fund, in the event of certain default triggers, was drafted in language designed to look like standard boilerplate. It was not standard boilerplate. The total exposure, if Lily was reading it correctly, and she thought she was north of $80 million, structured so that Naomi would appear, in any subsequent legal proceeding, to have entered the agreement knowingly. Lily's hands were completely still in her lap. She looked at Damien Pierce. He was leaning back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, watching the conversation with the expression of a man who was watching something go according to a plan he'd made a long time ago. She looked at Ethan. He was leaning forward, engaged, following the translated conversation with the intensity of a man who was fighting hard for something important. He had no idea. She could see that clearly. The openness of his posture, the way he responded to Naomi's questions with the specific earnestness of someone who genuinely believed in what he was selling. He had not read that clause. Or if he hadn't understood what it meant. Or, the thought moved through her quickly and left a cold trace, he had trusted his partner to prepare the documentation correctly, the way you trust someone you've worked alongside for years, the way trust works until the specific moment it stops working. Lily thought about her father. She thought about the phone call on the Thursday morning. She thought about Maya's tuition, which was due in 11 days, and her shift schedule for the rest of the month, and the 3 years it had taken her to build a reputation at the Wellington that kept her on the priority call list. She looked at Naomi. Naomi was waiting for the translation of Ethan's last answer. Her eyes, which had not left Lily's face since Lily had first spoken Japanese in this room, moved almost imperceptibly to the contract folder. Then back to Lily. She's seen it, Lilia thought. She's already seen it. She's waiting to see if I saw it too. Lily translated Ethan's answer, accurately, completely. Then she paused, in the pause that follows a completed translation, and looked at Naomi. And then, very quietly, in Japanese, she said something that was not part of the translation. She said, "Takeda-san, with your permission, I would like to ask Mr. Pierce a question about the contract on your behalf. Clause 14, subsection 3. Naomi's expression did not change, but she said, "Please proceed." Damien Pierce had no way to know what had just been said. He found out about 12 seconds later. Lily turned to Damien with the polite, neutral expression of a professional translator doing her job and said, "Takeda-san would like clarification on the debt structure outlined in Clause 14b, specifically the repayment terms in Appendix C and the personal guarantee provision in subsection 3. She'd like you to walk her through how that figure reconciles with the investment framework you discussed last week." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when everyone in the room is watching one person's face. Damien Pierce's face did something complicated and involuntary. It started to arrange itself into the expression of a man about to explain something routine, and then it caught on something, and the arrangement stopped halfway, and what was left was nothing that looked like routine. He said, That's standard protective language. It's in there to the personal guarantee provision," Lily said, keeping her voice entirely level. "Subsection 3 specifically, and the interest rate in Appendix C, which is, if I'm reading correctly, different from the rate discussed verbally. Takeda-san would like the variance explained." Ethan, sitting 3 feet from Damien, had gone very still. He was looking at Damien the way you look at someone when something has shifted, when a familiar face has just become the face of a question you should have asked a long time ago. Damien's voice, when it came, was careful in a way it hadn't been all evening. "Lily," he said, first name, with the specific emphasis of someone trying to reestablish a hierarchy, "this really isn't something we need to go through at dinner. The legal team can—" "Ethan," Naomi spoke in English. The entire table went quiet. It was the first time she had spoken English all evening. Her accent was present, but her command was complete and precise, and she had waited clearly for exactly this moment to use it. She looked at Ethan directly and said, "I would like to know, does your partner have your authorization for the terms in Appendix C?" Ethan looked at her. Then he looked at Damien. Then he reached across the table and picked up the contract folder and turned to Appendix C and started reading. The room was completely silent. Lily sat very still and watched Ethan Calloway read the document that was going to change everything, and thought about her father, and waited. Ethan read for a long time. Nobody spoke. Outside the 14th floor windows, Manhattan moved and glittered and made its enormous indifferent noise, entirely unaware of what was happening in this room. Ethan read to the bottom of the page. Then he turned it over and read the other side. Then he went back to Clause 14 and read that again. When he looked up, his face was completely white. Ethan set the folder down. He didn't slam it. He didn't throw it across the table. He set it down with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that if he let himself feel the full weight of what he'd just read, he would do something he couldn't take back. And there were still people in this room he needed to function in front of. But his hands were shaking slightly when he pulled them back from the table. Damien saw it. His expression shifted. Not into guilt exactly, which would have required a specific kind of self-awareness that Damien Pierce had never demonstrated, but into something more tactical. Recalculation. The look of a man deciding which version of the story was still salvageable. "Ethan," he said. His voice had dropped to the register people use when they want a conversation to stay private inside a room full of people. "Let me explain the structure. It's more nuanced than it looks on the page." "Don't." Ethan's voice was quiet. That was the thing that made Lily's chest tighten. The quietness of it. Men who shouted were manageable. Men who went very quiet were something else. There's context. "Damien." He said the name like he was setting it down next to the folder, like he was done handling it. "How long?" Damien blinked. "How long what?" How long has the company been structured this way? Not a question. The tone of it made that clear. The debt, the liability transfer, the personal guarantee clause that I never signed off on. How long has this been in the documentation that you've been presenting to investors? A beat. Something moved across Damien's face that came close to being honest, which was the most dangerous thing Lily had seen from him all evening. The framework has evolved, he said carefully, over the last few months. Market conditions required— Stop talking, Damien stopped. The table was entirely still. Lily sat at her corner position and did not move. She was aware of her own breathing. She was aware that Naomi, 2 feet to her left, had her hands folded on the table with the stillness of someone who has already made a decision and is now simply watching it execute. Ethan picked up the contract folder again, turned to Appendix C. Read one specific paragraph aloud, slowly, as if each word required separate effort. And then he looked at Damien and said, "This is $83 million in contingent liability, in my company's name. That I did not know about." Damien said nothing. "Tell me I'm misreading it." The structure is, "Tell me I'm misreading it." Silence. It lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. Ethan put the folder down again. He looked at the table for a moment, the way you look at a surface when you need something solid and flat and honest in your field of vision because everything else in the room has just become unreliable. Then he looked at Lily. She hadn't expected that. She had been trying to disappear again instinctively, the way she always tried to disappear when rooms became volatile, fold back into the wallpaper, become part of the furniture, wait for it to pass. But he looked directly at her, and his eyes had the specific raw quality of someone who has just had the ground shift under them and is still figuring out which direction is up. He said, "Is that what you saw in the document? Is that what you asked him about?" She held his gaze. "Yes." "How did you—" He stopped, started again. "How did you know where to look?" Lily thought about her father, about the Thursday morning phone call, about the way certain kinds of damage teaches you to recognize itself from a distance, the way someone who's been burned once learns very quickly to identify heat before it reaches them. She said, "I've seen this structure before." Something passed across his face. He didn't ask her to elaborate, which she appreciated because she was not ready to explain it, and this was not the moment. He nodded, once. Then he turned back to Damien, and the dinner, which had already been in trouble, became something else entirely. Naomi spoke then, in Japanese, and Lily translated without hesitation. "I would like Mr. Pierce to explain, in specific terms, what he intended to do with my capital once it was invested under the structure outlined in Appendix C." Damien's jaw tightened. "I don't see how that question—" "Mr. Pierce," Naomi said his name in English this time, clearly, without accent softening it. "I have been in business for 40 years. I have seen this particular architecture twice before." She paused. "Both times, the person who designed it went to prison." The room was so quiet, Lily could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Damien Pierce looked at Naomi Takeda for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan. Then he did something Lily hadn't predicted. He laughed. Short, sharp, the laugh of a man who has decided that offense is the last available defense. "This is incredible," he said. "This is genuinely incredible. We're sitting here, Ethan, we're sitting here at a $50 million negotiation, and we're letting a waitress and an investor who hasn't even committed to anything yet dismantle a structure that our legal team spent months developing." He pointed at Lily. Not aggressively, worse than that, dismissively, the way you point at an object. She found a clause she doesn't understand, threw it into the conversation at the worst possible moment, and now we're in crisis mode over nothing. "Bombset." Lily felt the point of that land somewhere in her sternum. She kept her face still. "She doesn't understand it," Ethan said. His voice had gone very flat. She explained it to Naomi clearly enough that Naomi stopped the dinner. Because she panicked her— "Damien." He leaned forward. "Stop. Talking. About Lily." He said it slowly, and the slowness of it was its own kind of intensity. "And start explaining to me, not to Naomi, not to Lily, to me, why our contract contains an $83 million liability structure that I have never seen before." Damien looked at him for a long moment, and then something in his posture changed. The performance dropped away. The glossy, expensive confidence that he wore like a second suit, it just fell, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way something falls when it's been undermined from below. Slowly, and then completely. What was left underneath was something smaller and older and less impressive. The company was going to fold, Damien said. His voice was different now, quieter, less curated. You know that. You've known for months. The Series B didn't close. The European deal collapsed. We were 6 months from payroll problems that we couldn't paper over anymore. He looked at Ethan with the specific intensity of someone who needs to be believed. I needed a solution, something that bought us time. The liability structure was a bridge, a way to bring in capital without revealing the full scope of our debt position to the investor before the deal was finalized. Once the money was in, we had runway to restructure, using her money to cover debt she didn't know she was inheriting. Lily said it quietly, in English, not as a translation, but as a statement. Damien's eyes cut to her. That is what you're describing, she said. She kept her voice even. She was aware that it was not her place, strictly speaking, to editorialize. She did it anyway, because the thing he was describing had a name and she thought someone in this room should say it. You were going to use Naomi's investment capital to service debt that she believed she was not responsible for. And then she paused because she had been reading documents and doing arithmetic while everyone else was talking. And then the company restructures under new terms. And if it fails, she's holding $83 million in secured liability against assets that are worth considerably less than that. And you're not, Damien said. It's more complicated than, is that correct? She wasn't asking him. She was asking Ethan. Ethan was looking at Damien with an expression that Lily found hard to watch. Not because it was violent or explosive, because it wasn't. Because it was the expression of someone absorbing something they can't unknow, something that is in the process of permanently rearranging their understanding of a relationship they had trusted completely. He said, Damien, tell me that's not what this is. Damien said nothing. Tell me, Ethan said again, and his voice broke on the word, not into tears, nothing that soft, but into the specific roughness of someone forcing a question through the thing that doesn't want to ask it. Tell me you weren't going to do this. Damien looked at him. And in the silence that followed, in the specific quality of that silence, the answer became as clear as if he'd written it on the wall. Ethan sat back in his chair. He put one hand over his mouth and stared at the table. He looked, Lily thought, like someone who has just been told that a building they loved is scheduled for demolition. The shock that something you believed was solid has already, technically, been gone for a while. The man across from him had been his business partner for 6 years. Had been, as far as Lily could piece together from things overheard and context understood, present through the hardest years of Ethan's life. Had been trusted with the company, with the financials, with the plans for the future of something Ethan had built from nothing while his wife was sick, and while he was raising a child alone, and while he was holding himself together through sheer stubborn refusal to fall apart. 6 years. Lily looked at her hands in her lap and felt a dull, heavy ache for a man she didn't know. And then Damien Pierce did the thing that made everything else irrelevant. He turned to Lily. He looked at her with the specific contempt of someone who has nothing left to lose and has decided to spend what remains on something petty. His voice came back, loud now, louder than anything he'd said all evening. And he said, You know what you did tonight? You walked into a room you don't belong in, and you blew up a deal that would have saved 30 employees their jobs. You're a waitress. You carry plates. You stood here eavesdropping on a private negotiation and decided you understood what you were looking at, and now because of you. That's enough. Ethan was on his feet. He hadn't raised his voice. He'd stood up, and the standing up was loud enough. Damien stopped. Don't. Ethan said it once, looking at Damien with an expression that had moved past anger into something colder and more permanent. Don't say another word to her. Ethan, come on. She saw something in a document that you spent months making sure I wouldn't see. His voice was steady, in the way that things are steady when they are braced against enormous pressure. She could have stayed quiet. She could have served the food and gone home and let it happen. She didn't. And you want to stand there and talk to her like she's the problem in this room. He shook his head once. No. Damien's eyes moved between Ethan and Lily and Naomi, and the calculation in them was visible and desperate and ugly. He was trying to find the angle, the play, the version of this that still worked. There wasn't one. Naomi spoke, in Japanese, calm, measured, with the specific cadence of someone who has been waiting for the correct moment and has determined that it has arrived. Lily translated, "I would like security, please. Mr. Pierce will be leaving now." Damien stared at her. "You can't. The document you presented to me tonight constitutes investment fraud under 3 separate jurisdictions that I am aware of," Naomi said, in English this time, looking directly at Damien with the eyes of someone who has outlasted considerably more dangerous people than him. "My legal team will be filing the appropriate notifications in the morning. I suggest you spend the time between now and then consulting with your own." The color drained from Damien's face in a way that was almost physically dramatic, like watching a tide go out. Lily pressed the service call button at the table. Within 90 seconds, 2 members of the Wellington security team appeared at the door. They were discreet about it. The hotel was good at discretion, but they were also unambiguous. Damien looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at him. Whatever Damien was looking for in that look, some version of the partnership, some version of the last 6 years, some thread of the connection that might still hold. He didn't find it. Ethan's face was closed, not cruel, not triumphant, just closed, the way a door closes when someone has made a final decision about what's on the other side. Damien picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He picked up his bag. He straightened his collar with the reflexive vanity of a man who couldn't stop performing even at the end of his own humiliation. He walked to the door. He stopped there for a moment, his back to the room, and Lily thought he was going to say something, some last word, some attempt at the closing statement he'd been denied, but he didn't. He walked through the door, and the security team followed, and the door closed behind them. The room exhaled. Not audibly, but the quality of the air changed, the way it changes when something that has been under pressure is finally released. Lily sat very still in her chair at the corner of the table. She was aware that her hands, which she had kept still and controlled through the entire confrontation, were now trembling slightly under the table where nobody could see them. She was aware that she had just done something that was going to have consequences, the shape of which she couldn't fully see yet, and that she was not, despite what the last 40 minutes might have suggested, a person who was comfortable with confrontation, or with risk, or with being in the center of rooms where important things happened. She was a person who carried plates and kept other people's secrets and went home to a small apartment in Queens where her sister was probably asleep already, and she was tired, and her feet hurt from the double shift, and some part of her was still standing in her parents' kitchen on a Thursday morning 17 years ago, watching her mother sit down slowly at the table like the strings holding her up had been quietly cut. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs to stop the trembling. Ethan sat back down. He leaned forward with his elbows on the table and put his face in his hands for a moment. Just a moment. Then he straightened up and looked at Naomi. "I apologize," he said. He said it simply, without the excessive qualification that apologies sometimes come buried in. "I didn't know what was in that document. I understand if that's not sufficient. I should have known." Naomi regarded him for a moment. Then she said, in English, in the measured way she had been using it since she chose to reveal she spoke it, "You trusted someone you had reason to trust. That is not stupidity. It is a calculated risk that did not work out." A pause. "I have made the same error. Twice." Ethan looked at her. "The difference between you and the other men who have sat across from me in situations like this one," Naomi said, "is that when the error was shown to you, you listened. You did not try to manage it. You did not blame the person who found it." She glanced at Lily. Brief. Specific. "That matters to me." Ethan followed her glance to Lily. Lily became aware that both of them were looking at her, which was somehow more uncomfortable than the previous 40 minutes of controlled crisis had been. She said, "I should get back to," and made a gesture toward her service station. "Please don't," Ethan said. She stopped. "I mean," he caught himself, recalibrated. "I mean, please stay, if you're willing." He looked slightly uncomfortable in the way of someone who has spent years being direct with people he considered equals and is realizing he should have been doing that with more people. "I don't actually know your last name." "Harper," she said. "Lily Harper." "Ethan Calloway." He said it without the performance that Damian Pierce would have brought to it. Just his name, offered the way you offer something you think the other person deserves to have. I think you just saved my company. Lily opened her mouth, closed it. She was aware that her face was doing something she couldn't fully control. Not crying, she was not going to cry in this dining room in front of these people, but something adjacent to it. The specific facial expression of someone absorbing a kindness they weren't expecting and don't entirely know how to hold. I found a clause in a contract, she said. You did considerably more than that. Naomi made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. It was the first informal sound she had made all evening, and it transformed her face briefly, made it younger, more textured, less composed, more human. Mr. Calloway, she said, I think we should order dessert, and then I think we should talk about what a real partnership between us might look like. Ethan blinked. You still want to? I came to New York to invest in a company with good infrastructure and a founder who has integrity. She glanced at the door through which Damian had left. The fraud was not your fraud. The question I need answered is whether the company itself is worth saving, separate from everything that man built around it. She looked at Ethan directly. Is it? A pause. Ethan considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, which Lily noted. The way he didn't immediately say yes, absolutely, of course. The way a man trying to sell you something would. He thought about it. The core technology is sound, he said finally. The client contracts are real. The team is good. The debt position is, he exhaled slowly, manageable, if it's restructured honestly and disclosed properly, which it should have been from the beginning. Naomi nodded once, the way you nod when someone has confirmed something you already suspected. Then yes, she said. I want to continue. Lily ordered dessert for the table. She was not entirely sure what her role was in the room anymore. Not translator, not waitstaff exactly, something in between that didn't have a clean category. She defaulted to useful, which had always been her default, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that her feet still hurt, and she had another shift in 14 hours. As she was moving toward the service station, Ethan said her name. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not the shell-shocked blankness from earlier, not the cold control of the confrontation. Something more considered, more direct. He said, How did you know where to look in the contract? You said you'd seen the structure before. He paused. If it's something you'd rather not. My father, she said. She said it quickly, before the alternative, which was to deflect and avoid and go back to being invisible. He had a small import business. When I was 17, someone brought him a deal that looked like the right kind of opportunity at the right moment. He trusted them. She looked at the table, back at Ethan. He signed something he didn't fully understand because he trusted them, and the structure buried inside it, the liability transfer, the secured debt against assets he didn't know were encumbered. She stopped. It's not exactly the same, but it's the same shape. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What happened to him? He asked. He lost the business. He spent 3 years in legal proceedings trying to recover assets that were gone before he knew they were gone. She said it evenly, because she had learned to say it evenly. He never really... She stopped again, found a different way around it. He wasn't the same after. My mom worked 2 jobs. I dropped out of a university program when my parents died. My sister was 15. Ethan said nothing, but he held her gaze in a way that felt different from sympathy, less like pity and more like the specific attention of someone who is trying to really understand what you've told them, not just receive it and move on. I'm sorry, he said. She nodded. It was a long time ago. That doesn't always make it shorter. She looked at him, slightly surprised. He looked slightly surprised that he'd said it. He looked away first toward the window where the city was doing its endless illuminated thing outside. His jaw was set, but his shoulders were fractionally less rigid than they'd been all evening, some of the hours-long tension beginning to release now that the worst of the night was behind them. My daughter's 7, he said. It came out like something he hadn't planned to say, connected to what she'd told him by a logic that was emotional rather than sequential. Her name's Clara. She's with a sitter tonight. A pause. She keeps a photograph of her mother on the nightstand. She wipes the frame every week. I don't know who taught her to do that. Another pause. shorter. Nobody taught her. She just does it. Lily stood in the middle of the dining room on the 14th floor of the Wellington Hotel at 11:20 on a Tuesday night, and she thought about a 7-year-old girl cleaning a photograph frame, and something in her chest went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with recognition. She said, "She sounds extraordinary." "She is," Ethan said. Then, with the wry edge of someone surprised by their own candor, "She also refuses to eat anything orange, including carrots, squash, the sweet potatoes that her pediatrician specifically recommended. Anything orange is categorically rejected." Lily almost laughed. It surprised her, the way real laughter surprises you. Came from somewhere she hadn't expected to access tonight. "Orange is a very suspicious color," she said. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time that evening, properly, something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, not quite, but the thing right before one. The movement of a face that has forgotten what it feels like and is remembering. Then Naomi cleared her throat from the table. Both of them looked over. She was holding the dessert menu with the expression of someone who has been patient but would like that acknowledged. "When you are both ready," she said, with the specific dryness of a 61-year-old woman who has seen everything. "I believe there is a chocolate soufflé on this menu that requires 20 minutes advance notice, and it is getting late." Lily went back to the table. She took the dessert order. She communicated it to the kitchen. She moved through the rest of the motions of her job with the practiced efficiency of 4 years of doing exactly this, and tried not to think about the fact that her entire body was vibrating slightly, still, from the sustained adrenaline of the last 2 hours. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored panel near the service entrance as she passed. Pressed black uniform, hair still neat, expression controlled, and thought, "You look exactly the same as you did when this evening started." It seemed impossible somehow. The particular impossibility of exteriors. The soufflé arrived at 11:45. They ate it. The conversation shifted slowly into the kind of talk that follows crisis. Quieter, more careful, with the specific texture of people who have been through something together and are not yet sure what they are to each other on the other side of it. Naomi asked Lily questions. Not interrogating, asking genuinely, the way someone asks when they are interested in the answer for its own sake. How long had she lived in Osaka? What part of the city? What her father's business had dealt in? Lily answered honestly, which was not her instinct but felt, in this room on this night, like the only register that made sense. Ethan mostly listened. He ate his soufflé slowly. He checked his phone once, and Lily saw the screen light up and saw the wallpaper photo. A little girl with dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile holding what appeared to be a very large stuffed rabbit, before the screen went dark again. His face when he looked at the photo lasted about 1 second, and in that second was everything a person needed to know about Ethan Callaway. Somewhere around midnight, Naomi folded her napkin with the careful precision she brought to everything and said, "I have a proposal. A different one from what we came here to discuss." She looked at Ethan. "I would like my team to do a proper audit of Callaway Dynamics' actual position. Honest numbers, disclosed properly. No Appendix C surprises. If the underlying business is what you've described tonight, I am prepared to discuss a restructured partnership that doesn't require anyone to commit fraud against me." The faintest trace of dry humor moved through her voice. "I find I prefer it that way." Ethan said, "I would welcome that entirely." Then Naomi looked at Lily. "Miss Harper," she said, "I would like to speak with you before I leave this evening, separately, if that is acceptable." Lily blinked. Of course. She didn't ask what it was about. Some instinct told her she'd find out when Naomi was ready for her to find out, and not before. The dinner wound down. The plates were cleared. The check was handled through the corporate account, which Ethan signed with the pen Lily brought, and she noticed that his signature was small and precise. Nothing like the large territorial signature of men who use their name as a territorial claim. The other waitstaff filtered in and out, cleaning up the peripheral items, doing the invisible work that kept the room functioning. Lily's colleague Priya caught her eye across the room at one point with a look that said, "What in the world has been happening in here?" And Lily gave her a tiny fractional shrug that tried to say, "I will tell you everything later," and probably communicated mostly, "I genuinely don't know." When Ethan stood to leave, he stopped beside Lily. He was closer than she'd expected, close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to maintain eye contact. She was 5'4", and he had 8 inches on her. Up close, the exhaustion on his face was more visible, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the particular hollowness around his jaw that people get when they've been running on anxiety for too long. He said, "I'm going to have my lawyer look at everything Damien has touched in the last 6 months. A pause. "It's going to be a bad few weeks." "Probably," she agreed. She didn't try to soften it. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has just gotten unexpectedly honest information and appreciated it more than comfort would have offered. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did tonight. I know it wasn't—" He paused, chose his words with care. "It wasn't a small thing. What it cost you to do it. I don't want to assume I know what that was, but I'm not unaware that it was something." Lily said, "I hope it helps. Your company, your—" She stopped, thought of Clara and the photograph and the orange food boycott. Everything. Something moved across his face at that, brief and unguarded and quickly composed again. He nodded once, then he left. Naomi did not leave immediately. She waited until Ethan was gone, until the room was down to Lily and the cleaning routine and the late-night quiet of a hotel floor winding down. Then she stood and smoothed her jacket and looked at Lily with the complete attention of someone who has been thinking about what they want to say for a while. "How much does the Wellington pay you?" she asked. Lily, who had not been expecting this question, gave the number. Naomi's expression did not change, but something around her eyes did. She looked at Lily for a moment longer. "I have a North American operations division," she said. "It is based in New York. It is run by people who are competent and very good at the specific work they do. It does not have, currently, anyone in a coordinating role who speaks both English and Japanese fluently, who understands the cultural dimensions of cross-market partnership, and who has the kind of judgment you demonstrated tonight." She paused to let this land. Lily stood in her pressed black uniform in the 14th floor dining room at 12:15 in the morning, with tired feet and a cracked phone and 11 days until her sister's tuition was due, and understood that she was being offered something. "I would not be asking you to carry plates," Naomi said. "The role I'm describing is executive level. It would require 3 months of formal onboarding and orientation to our systems. The salary—" She named a number that was specific and significant and landed in Lily's chest like a stone thrown into still water, rippling outward. Lily opened her mouth. "You don't have to answer tonight," Naomi said. The softness in her voice was not performative. It was the specific gentleness of someone who has been watching carefully enough to know that the person across from them needs a moment. "Take the time you need. But I want you to know that what I saw tonight, the way you read that room, the way you translated not just the language but everything underneath the language, that is not a skill that is easy to find. And I have been looking." Lily thought about a lot of things in the silence that followed. She thought about Maya asleep in their apartment in Queens, textbooks stacked on the kitchen table. She thought about her father's business and the shapes that opportunities take when they are real versus when they only look like something real. She thought about the 4 years she'd spent being invisible in rooms where important things happened to other people. She thought about the way Naomi Takeda had looked at her from across this room. Not through her, not around her, but at her. The specific experience of being actually seen by someone who had no reason to bother. "I need to think about it," she said. "Good," Naomi said, in a tone that indicated she approved of people who thought rather than leaping. "Here's my card." She produced it with both hands, the proper way, and held it at the correct angle for Lily to receive it with both of hers, which she did. Their eyes met. Naomi's expression held something that Lily would think about later, turning it over and looking at it from different angles, trying to place it. It was not pity, and it was not charity, and it was not the look of a powerful person bestowing something on a lesser one. It was more like recognition. The look of one person seeing something in another person that they had once seen in a mirror, a long time ago, in a different kind of room. "Good evening, Miss Harper," Naomi said, and bowed, at the correct angle, held for the correct count. Lily bowed back. Naomi left. The room was empty. Lily stood in the middle of it for a moment, alone with the cleared tables and the lingering smell of the souffle and the city moving silently outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. She held Naomi's business card in both hands. She looked at it. Then she slipped it into the pocket of her uniform, picked up a water glass someone had left near the window, and carried it back to the service station. She had 4 more hours left on her shift. The subway home at 2 in the morning had its own particular atmosphere. Not unpleasant. Lily had made this trip enough times that she'd stopped being afraid of it and started simply accepting it as a specific category of city experience. The late-night train with its scattered passengers, each one sealed inside their own exhaustion or their own thoughts. None of them looking at each other with anything more than the peripheral awareness of people who have agreed, silently, to share a space without acknowledging it. She sat in a window seat and watched the tunnel walls go by and held Naomi's business card in her jacket pocket without taking it out. She could feel it there. The specific weight of something that had changed the geometry of an evening she'd entered expecting nothing more than a long shift and the usual ache in her lower back. The train lurched. A man across the aisle was asleep with his chin on his chest. A woman at the far end of the car was reading something on her phone with the specific focus of someone using reading to avoid thinking. Lily understood that impulse. She tried not to think, failed at it, which was standard. What she kept coming back to was not the offer, though the offer sat in her chest like something swallowed too large, waiting to be processed. But the moment just before she had spoken in Japanese, the moment where she had been standing at her service station, watching the deal fall apart, watching Naomi's hands go still on that document, watching Ethan's jaw work against something he couldn't name yet, and she had made the decision to step forward. Except it hadn't felt like a decision. That was the thing that kept snagging. Decisions had a specific sensation, the weight of alternatives, the awareness of choosing one thing over another. What she had felt was closer to inevitability, like the moment on a cold morning when you have been holding your coat closed with your hands, and your hands simply run out of strength, and the coat opens, and the cold comes in, and there is nothing to be done about it, because you were never going to be strong enough to hold it closed forever. She had been holding herself closed for a long time. She thought about that while the train moved underground through the dark. When she got home, Maya was asleep. The apartment was small in the way that New York apartments are small when you are not wealthy. Functionally small, everything positioned with the specific pragmatism of people who have learned to treat square footage as a logic problem rather than a comfort question. The kitchen table had Maya's organic chemistry textbook open on it, a mug with a tea bag still in it gone cold, and 3 index cards covered in Maya's handwriting fanned out in a study arrangement that had clearly preceded sleep by approximately 12 minutes. Lily moved quietly. She made herself a glass of water. She sat at the kitchen table with Maya's textbook and her cold tea, and the business card she finally took out of her pocket and laid flat on the table in front of her. Naomi Takeda. 3 lines of contact information. The cardstock was heavy, cream-colored, the printing precise and unfussy. The kind of card that didn't need to announce itself. She stared at it for a while. Then she turned it face down, drank her water, and went to bed. She was asleep within 6 minutes, which surprised her. She had expected her mind to run in circles until morning. Instead, the exhaustion simply overtook her the way it sometimes did after long shifts. Not gradually, but all at once, like a power cut, everything off. She did not dream, or if she did, she didn't remember it when her alarm went off at 7:15. Maya was already up. This was unusual. Her first class was at 10, and Lily found her standing at the kitchen counter eating toast with the specific energy of someone who had been awake for a while and had been waiting with some difficulty. "Priya texted me," Maya said, before Lily had fully cleared the doorway. Lily stopped. "Priya, your coworker Priya. Priya, who has my number because of that time you left your phone at work and I had to coordinate pickup with her." Maya was 23 and had Lily's same dark hair and a directness that Lily had always privately envied. "She texted me at 1:40 this morning saying, and I'm quoting, 'Your sister single-handedly stopped a $50 million fraud tonight and you need to ask her about it.'" Lily went to the coffee maker. "That's an exaggeration," she said. "Is it, though? It's a significant exaggeration." Lily. Maya set her toast down. She had the expression she got when she'd decided something was important and was not going to let conversational deflection redirect her. "What happened last night?" Lily made coffee. She brought both cups to the table. She sat down across from her sister and looked at Naomi's card, still face down on the table where she'd left it, and then she turned it over and pushed it across to Maya. Maya looked at it, looked up. "Naomi Takeda." She said the name with the slight emphasis of someone recognizing it from somewhere. "Wait, isn't she the Japanese investor? The one who I read about her in The Economist. She's like enormous. She's significant, Lily agreed. Why do you have her card? So Lily told her. She told it the way she told most things, not dramatically, without embellishment, in the particular flat register that was her default for events that were internally large and externally calm. She told her about the translation app, and Damian Pierce, and the moment Naomi's hands stopped moving on the contract. She told her about stepping forward. She told her what she had found in Clause 14b and how she had asked the question and what Damian's face had done when she did. Maya sat very still through most of this, which was unlike her. She was a person who punctuated other people's stories with reactions, small sounds, expressions, the occasional interjection. She did almost none of that. She just listened, with the focused quality of someone who understands they are hearing something important and doesn't want to interrupt the receiving of it. When Lily got to Naomi's offer, Maya made a sound. Not words, just a sound. Short and sharp. The involuntary vocalization of a person absorbing something larger than they were prepared for. She offered you a job, Maya said. A role. Executive level. Maya stopped. Started again. She offered you an executive level position. She said I don't have to answer right away. Lily. Maya's voice had something in it that Lily couldn't immediately categorize. Not excitement, not exactly. Something more complicated than excitement. She picked up the business card and looked at it again. Lily, do you understand what this is? I understand what it looks like. Do you understand what it is? Maya leaned forward. Because what you're doing right now, the voice you're using, the way you said, it looks like instead of it is, you're already building exits. You do this. You get given something real and you immediately start constructing reasons it might not be. Lily wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I don't know her, she said. I know what she was like in a room for 3 hours under very specific circumstances. That's not knowing someone. No, but it's a starting point, which is more than you had yesterday. She could withdraw the offer tomorrow. She could decide overnight it was an impulsive decision. She could, Maya agreed, or it could be real. And you could call her and find out. She put the card down between them. What are you actually afraid of? Lily looked at the card. She thought about saying nothing, because that was her default. And then she thought about what an extraordinary waste of time that would be. That I'll take it, she said, and I'll get it wrong. And it'll be worse than not having tried. Maya looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who has known you your whole life and loves you despite, or maybe because of, the specific ways you are broken. Dad got it wrong, Maya said quietly. That's what you mean. You mean if you try for something real and it falls apart, it does what it did to him. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car horn somewhere on the street, the refrigerator humming. Morning coming through the window at the angle it came in November. He wasn't the same after, Lily said. It was almost exactly what she'd said to Ethan last night, the same careful route around the larger thing. No, Maya agreed. He wasn't. A pause. But he also wasn't you. And the thing that happened to him, the fraud, the contract, the people who designed it to destroy him, that's not what's being offered to you. Naomi Takeda didn't con you. She watched you figure out someone else's con, and then she offered you a job because of it. She pushed the card slightly closer to Lily's side of the table. That's the opposite of what happened to Dad. Lily stared at the card. She didn't call that morning. She wasn't ready that morning. But she kept the card on the kitchen table instead of in her pocket, which was its own kind of answer. The next few days were loud in the ways that mattered, and quiet in the ways that were harder. 2 mornings after the dinner, Ethan Calloway's name appeared in the business section of 3 different publications. None of the coverage was about the Wellington dinner specifically. The Wellington's discretion held, as it always did, but the headlines circled the same territory. Callaway Dynamics CEO distances company from co-founder amid regulatory review. Another, Pierce out at Callaway Dynamics as fraud investigation opens. The third, more aggressive. AI logistics startups, internal documents reveal disputed financial disclosures. CEO vows transparency. Lily read all three on her phone on her break, standing outside the Wellington staff entrance in the cold with her coat not quite buttoned, and something in her chest did a complicated thing. He'd done it. He'd disclosed. He'd gone public with the problems instead of managing them in private, which was what a lot of men in his position would have chosen. The quiet restructuring, the face-saving version, the narrative that kept everyone's fingerprints off the original mess. He hadn't done that. She wasn't sure why it mattered to her as much as it did. She told herself it didn't matter, particularly, and then kept reading the articles on her lunch break. The third day, her manager called her into his office. Mr. Fenton had been manager of the Wellington's food and beverage operations for 11 years and had the specific quality of a person whose authority existed entirely within a defined perimeter, and who was very comfortable as long as everyone acknowledged that perimeter and made no moves toward its edges. He was not, in Lily's experience, a cruel man. He was a careful one, which was sometimes worse. He asked her to sit down. "I've received some feedback," he said, "about the Callaway dinner Tuesday night." Lily sat with her hands in her lap. "Okay." "Specifically about your conduct during the dinner." She had known this was coming. She had known it since 2:15 that morning when she'd finally left the 14th floor, and the knowing hadn't made it easier to sit in the chair across from Fenton's desk and wait for whatever shape it was going to take. "I understand," she said. "The guest protocol for private events is clear," he said. He was looking at his desk rather than at her, which she noted. "Staff doesn't participate in guest conversations. Staff doesn't engage with business discussions. Staff doesn't—" He stopped, looked up. Something in his expression was uncomfortable, which was at least honest. "Lily, you sat down at the table." "I did." "You engaged in a business negotiation." "I translated a business negotiation." At the request of the guest. Naomi Takeda asked for me specifically. When she did, I was operating as a service to the guest, which is—" She paused, kept her voice level. "Which is what we're here to do." Fenton looked at her. "The Callaway account is important to us," he said after a moment. "I know. If there had been a complaint from the corporate side, has there been a complaint?" He moved some papers on his desk. The papers didn't need moving, she could see that. He was buying a moment. "No," he said finally. "There hasn't." Another pause, longer. "In fact, I received a call yesterday morning from Mr. Callaway's office. They've re-registered the corporate account as a preferred guest account, which is," he cleared his throat, "which is a significant account. And the associate who called mentioned specifically that they wanted to express appreciation for the service quality on Tuesday night." Lily said nothing. "He mentioned your name," Fenton said. He said it like he was acknowledging something slightly more complicated than a simple compliment. He said specifically that the service provided by Lily Harper was exceptional and that it made a material difference to the evening. She sat very still. "Material difference," she repeated. "Those were the words?" Fenton uncapped and recapped his pen. "I'm going to need to document the protocol deviation for the event record," he said. "I want that on the table, but I'm not taking disciplinary action, given the circumstances." He looked at her with the expression of a man who is aware he is doing something that doesn't fit neatly into his existing operational framework and is choosing to do it anyway. "I'm noting it as a guest accommodation decision, which means it stays in the event file and doesn't go in your personnel record." Lily released a breath she hadn't fully known she was holding. "Thank you," she said. "Don't make it a habit." She almost smiled. "I'll try not to." She was standing to leave when he said, "Lily." She turned. He was looking at his desk again, which was apparently where his face went when he wasn't sure how to hold his expression. "You've worked here 4 years. You're a good employee. You always have been." He paused. "I'm aware that's not entirely sufficient compensation for what this job is." She looked at him. "No," she said honestly. "It isn't. Not unkindly, just truthfully. But thank you for saying it." She walked out. She stood in the hallway for a moment outside his door and breathed. Then she went back to work. What she did not tell Fenton, what she did not tell anyone except Maya, in fragments over the following days, was that Naomi's card was not the only contact she'd received after Tuesday night. On Wednesday afternoon, a message arrived through the Wellington's General Inquiry form, addressed to her by name. The Wellington's digital coordinator had forwarded it with a note that said simply, This came through the public form and seems personal, forwarding in case it's important. The message was from Ethan Calloway's assistant, a woman named Judith, who wrote with the efficient warmth of someone who'd been doing high-level administrative work for a long time and had developed a specific professional tone that was neither cold nor overly familiar. She said that Mr. Calloway wanted Lily to have his direct contact information if she was willing to receive it, that he wanted to express his personal appreciation for Tuesday evening, and that he also had a legal question he wanted to ask her, not to involve her in anything ongoing, but a specific question about the timeline of what she'd observed. Lily read the message 3 times. She replied that she was willing to receive his contact information. 20 minutes later, a number appeared in her inbox with a note that said simply, "Ethan, please feel free to use this or not. Either is fine. EC." She stored the number in her phone. She did not use it immediately. She moved through the rest of her Wednesday shift with the specific calibrated normalcy of someone who is managing a significant amount of interior weather while doing a job that requires a perfectly controlled exterior, and got quite good at it by the end of the night. It was Maya who finally said, "Just call him. Not about the job. Not about Naomi's offer," which was still sitting in a state of suspended decision on the kitchen table between them. About Ethan. Specifically about the way Lily had mentioned his name 3 times in the space of a conversation that was ostensibly about something else, and the way she'd said it each time with the slight unawareness of someone who doesn't realize they keep returning to the same point. "I have no reason to call him," Lily said. "He has an assistant for the legal question. He gave you his personal number. That's standard for high-level contacts." Maya looked at her with the expression that meant she had opinions she was choosing to hold back out of tactical patience, and said, "Okay." Lily called him on Saturday morning. She told herself it was about the legal question. She called at 10:15 because that was a reasonable business hour on a weekend and not so early that it read as eager. He picked up on the second ring. "Lily." Not hello, is this Lily? Just her name, like he'd been expecting the call. Like it was a reasonable continuation of a conversation rather than the start of one. "Hi," she said. She was standing in the kitchen. Maya had conveniently left to go to the library with an elaborate pretense of not hovering. "I got the message from Judith about the legal question." "Right," he said. "Yes." A pause that had something in it, not awkward exactly, more like the pause of someone reorienting. "Thank you for calling. I should say first, outside of the legal question, I wanted to say again, without an audience this time, what I said Tuesday night. You didn't have to do any of what you did. I know that." Lily looked at the kitchen window. "I know," she said, "and I know that it probably came with costs I'm not fully aware of. The hotel—" "It's handled," she said. "I'm fine." A brief silence. "Are you sure?" She appreciated that he asked it plainly, without the over-solicitation of someone performing concern. He asked it the way you ask someone a real question. "Yes," she said. "Fenton gave me a note in the event file and no disciplinary action. Mr. Calloway's office helped with that, I think." "Judith made a call," he said, with the slight directness of someone confirming rather than denying. "I hope that wasn't overstepping." "It wasn't. Thank you." "Good." Another pause. She could hear background noise on his end. Not office noise, something warmer. A television maybe, or she heard a small high voice say something indistinct, and then his voice away from the phone, quick and gentle. 2 minutes, Clara." Then back. "Sorry, I work from home Saturdays, loosely." "That's fine," she said. And then, before she could stop herself, "Is she with you today, Clara?" A beat. "Yeah, we're doing a puzzle. She's very emphatic about me not being allowed to touch the border pieces, which is apparently her domain." Lily almost smiled. "Strategic." "Completely. I'm only allowed to find the interior pieces and present them to her for consideration." A trace of something almost light in his voice. "I'm running a very junior role in this operation." She did smile this time. She turned away from the window so Maya couldn't see it through the glass if she happened to walk by, which was possibly paranoid but felt correct. "The legal question," she said, bringing herself back. "Right." "Yes." She heard him shift, the change in audio that meant he'd moved to a different room, lower background noise, more private. My attorneys are building a timeline of the contract's development, specifically when certain clauses were added, who had access to the drafts, that kind of thing. They've asked me to collect first-hand accounts from anyone who observed the dinner Tuesday, because the timing of when Damien presented the contract versus when certain revisions were made is apparently significant. I'd give a statement, she said, whatever form they need. You'd be willing to do that? Yes. A pause that was different from the earlier ones, more considered. It might mean some follow-up, a formal interview with the attorneys. It probably won't be complicated, but it'll take your time. I understand. Okay. He said it with a release of breath, Maum. Not relief exactly, more like the specific exhale of someone who'd been carrying something and has set it down and is checking how heavy it actually was. Judith will reach out with the details. A pause. Are you working today? The question was casual. She took it as casual. Tonight, she said. Evening shift. Do you always work weekends? I usually pick up what's available. She paused, considering how much explanation that required. My sister's in school. It helps. What is she studying? Biochem. She wants to go into pharmaceutical research. Lily leaned against the counter. She's very good. She studies like it's a competitive sport. That's good. That's good. He said it with the genuine warmth of someone who actually thinks it's good, not just the reflex of someone filling conversational space. Claire's already announced she wants to be either a marine biologist or a professional baker. I've been told these are not mutually exclusive. They're absolutely not, Lily said. That's what I told her. She was very satisfied with that answer. They talked for 11 more minutes. It was not about the legal question. It was about, she couldn't have said specifically, after exactly what it was about. It was about small things, the kind of conversation that has no particular agenda except that the people in it are finding it easier than they expected, and neither wants to be the first to end it. She was the first to end it eventually. She had things to do before her shift. He understood. He said he'd have Judith send the information about the attorney. She said she'd look for it. She said goodbye. He said her name when he said it. Goodbye, Lily. And she noticed this and told herself she was reading too much into a socially standard send-off. She stood in her kitchen after hanging up and thought, this is not going anywhere. And then she thought, he has a daughter and a company in crisis and a partner who just tried to defraud him, and he does not need any additional complications in his life. And then she thought, I have an offer from Naomi Takeda sitting on this table, and I need to decide what I'm going to do about it. She called Naomi on Monday. She had spent the weekend constructing arguments for and against, running the calculation multiple times in multiple directions, asking Maya questions that were really just the same question in different clothing, lying awake in the specific way of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting for themselves to admit it. She called at 9:30 Monday morning before her nerves had time to build a case against it. Naomi answered herself, not an assistant. Naomi directly on the first ring. Miss Harper, she said as though she'd been expecting this call on this morning specifically, which Lily found either impressive or slightly unnerving and decided it was probably both. Good morning, Takeda-san, Lily said. Then, I've thought about your offer. I assumed, Naomi said, with the minimal dryness that was apparently her version of warmth. And, Lily took a breath. I'd like to accept it, she said. If it's still available. A pause. Short. It is, Naomi said. Good. Another pause, this one warmer somehow, though her tone hadn't changed. I'll have my assistant contact you this week with the onboarding materials and a contract for your review. A beat. Read the contract carefully. Lily heard the specific intention behind that. I will, she said. And then, Takeda-san, thank you for seeing me. She hadn't planned to say it. It came from somewhere lower than planning. Naomi was quiet for a moment. You made yourself visible, she said finally. That required its own courage. A pause. I simply did not look away. After she hung up, Lily sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She looked at the place where the business card had been. She'd moved it to her wallet, finally, 2 days ago. And she thought about what it meant to accept something real and how different it felt from imagining it. It felt terrifying. It also felt, underneath that, like something solid, like ground she hadn't been standing on before. She was still sitting at the table when she heard Maya's key in the lock. Maya came in, dropped her bag, looked at Lily's face and said, "You did it." Not a question. "I called her," Lily said. Maya sat down across from her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. This was unusual for Maya, who filled silences by instinct and training. But she let this one sit, and Lily was grateful for it. "Dad would have been terrified for you," Maya said eventually. "I know. And then he would have been proud." She said it simply, the way simple things are best said. "He would have been really proud." Lily looked at the table. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think so too." 3 weeks later, Damian Pierce was formally charged with securities fraud and wire fraud in connection with the Callaway Dynamics investment proposal. And 2 additional investigations were opened related to prior dealings that the original audit had surfaced. His lawyer issued a statement that contained the word misunderstanding 4 times, which Lily read in a news alert on her phone during her morning commute, and then put her phone away and stared out the train window for a while. She felt mostly tired, not satisfied. She'd expected satisfaction, or something like it. The specific resolution that arrives when a bad thing that happened to good people gets officially named and addressed. But what she actually felt was tired in the specific way of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has only just put it down. The tiredness that comes after, not during. She thought about her father, about the men who had brought contracts and smiles to his door, about whether any of them had ever been charged with anything, or whether the legal architecture of what they'd done had been just opaque enough, just technical enough, to stay in the category of sharp practice rather than fraud. She suspected the latter. She would never know for certain. What she knew was that this time it had gone differently. This time, someone had been in the room who could read the contract, and this time she had not stayed quiet. She got off at her stop and walked to the Callaway Dynamics offices, where she had been spending 2 days a week for the past 3 weeks, helping Ethan's restructured team prepare disclosure documentation for the new partnership with Naomi's fund. It was not her official role. Her official role, which started in 2 weeks when her Wellington notice period ended, was with Naomi's North American operation. But Naomi had suggested it as part of her onboarding, a way to understand both sides of the partnership she would eventually be coordinating between. The Callaway offices were on the 18th floor of a building on West 43rd Street. Open plan in the way of tech companies who'd committed to the aesthetic of collaborative space while still managing the specific interpersonal friction of people who worked too closely and too intensely. The team was smaller than it had been before the crisis. Some people had left. Some had been let go as the company shed the operational infrastructure that Damian's financial engineering had supported. What remained was compact and, from what Lily could observe, genuinely good. The kind of people who stayed through the ugly part because they believed in the thing they'd helped build. Ethan moved through the space differently than she'd expected. He was quieter in his own office than he'd seemed even at the dinner, less performative in the absence of an audience, more direct, more willing to sit with uncertainty rather than talk over it. She had spent enough time around people who managed crisis by projecting confidence to recognize the difference between that and someone who simply tolerated the unresolved and kept moving. He was good at this. She hadn't known that before she saw it. They worked mostly in parallel those first weeks. She on the disclosure documentation, he in meetings and calls that spilled out of his office, in fragments she could occasionally hear from the conference table where she worked. They talked directly when they needed to, passed documents back and forth, had the efficient communication of people who have established, without discussing it, that they don't need to fill silence with unnecessary words. It was on the 3rd week, a Wednesday, that he appeared beside her conference table at around 4 in the afternoon and said, "Can I ask you something that isn't about the documents?" She looked up. "Sure." He sat down across from her. He had the look of someone who had been working since early and was feeling the accumulation of it. His tie was loosened about 2 inches. He had a coffee cup that appeared to be empty and that he was holding anyway. "When you called Naomi," he said, "when you accepted her offer, was part of the decision because of Tuesday night specifically, or were you already thinking about leaving the Wellington?" Lily considered the question. It deserved a real answer. "I wasn't thinking about it," she said. "I wasn't thinking about very much beyond the next shift in my sister's tuition. I think I'd..." She stopped, found the honest version. I think I'd been making myself very small for a long time and telling myself it was practicality. Naomi's offer made it harder to keep doing that. He nodded slowly. Is that a bad thing? He asked. She thought about it. It's a terrifying thing, she said. I haven't decided yet whether it's bad. He almost smiled. Fair. A pause. Why do you ask? She said. He looked at his empty coffee cup. I'm trying to understand what it looks like when someone decides to stop making themselves small, he said. I think I've been doing a version of the same thing. He looked up. Burying everything in work so I didn't have to be anywhere else. Clara's 7 and I missed her school play last spring because of a financing call. He said it the way you say things that you have been carrying and are finally just putting on the table to look at. I told her it was important. She said okay. She always says okay. A pause. She's 7. She shouldn't have to say okay about something like that. Lily held his gaze. No, she said. She shouldn't. He nodded. He looked like he'd needed someone to simply agree with him about that, without qualification. I'm trying to restructure more than the company, he said. She understood what he meant. She didn't say so out loud, but she thought he knew that she did. He stood up. He looked at the empty cup in his hand as if slightly surprised to find it there. Do you want coffee? He said. She looked at the documents in front of her, at the clock, at the 3 paragraphs she still needed to review before end of day. Yes, she said. He went to get it. He brought it back. He set hers down carefully, the way people set things down when they are paying attention, and went back to his office. Lily looked at the coffee cup for a moment. Then she went back to work. Outside the 18th floor windows, November New York did what it did, enormous and cold and indifferent, and from this height, briefly beautiful in the way that difficult things sometimes were. December came to New York the way it always did, not gradually, but all at once, the temperature dropping over a single weekend like a decision being made, the city shifting its coat collar up and its pace forward, and its entire collective disposition toward something more interior. The light changed, the hours shortened, the streets filled with people who were moving faster and looking down more, the specific combination of cold and purpose that Manhattan wore in the weeks before the year ended. Lily noticed all of this from different windows than she was used to. Her last shift at the Wellington had been a Tuesday, exactly 4 weeks after the dinner on the 14th floor. She had clocked out at 11:30, changed in the staff locker room, said goodbye to Priya, who had cried with the specific intensity of someone who felt things fully and made no apology for it, and then walked out the service entrance into the cold for the last time as a Wellington employee. She had stood on the sidewalk for a minute. Just a minute. The city moved around her, a cab horn somewhere, steam from a grate, the cold air doing what cold air does when you've been inside a warm building and step out into it, finding every gap in your coat immediately, efficiently, without malice. Then she had walked to the subway and gone home. The first Monday at Naomi's North American operation, her name was on the building directory beside the elevator bank. This was a small thing. It was not a small thing. She had stood in front of it for longer than was probably professional, reading L. Harper, Strategic Partnerships, Asia-Pacific Operations in the building's standard sans serif font, and thought about all the rooms she had stood in where her name appeared nowhere. Her office, she had an office, which remained slightly surreal, was on the 12th floor, corner of the building, with a window that looked west over a narrow canyon of midtown buildings toward a postage stamp of sky. The desk was real wood and too large for what she needed, and she had not yet figured out what to put on it other than her laptop and the yellow legal pad that she wrote notes on because she thought better on paper. There was a plant. She had not put it there. It had arrived her first morning with a card that said, in Naomi's precise handwriting, plants require consistent attention. So does good work. NT. She had put the card in her top drawer. She watered the plant every Monday. The work itself was a lot, and also not at all what she'd expected, and also, underneath the volume and the learning curve and the specific anxiety of being new at something that mattered, genuinely engaging in a way that her body registered before her brain did. The first time she sat in a call with Naomi's Tokyo team, translating a complex restructuring discussion in real time, while simultaneously tracking the subtext of what wasn't being said out loud on either side, She finished the call and sat at her desk for a moment and thought, oh, this is what it feels like when a skill fits the work. She had been good at the Wellington. She had been efficient and reliable and praised in the specific way that good invisible work gets praised, quietly, by people who noticed its absence more than its presence. This was different. This was work that required her to be the opposite of invisible. To speak. To interpret not just language, but context, nuance, the space between what people said and what they meant, and what they needed the other party to understand. She was good at it, better than she'd expected. The surprise of this wore off slowly, like ice thawing. Not all at once, but consistently, until one morning she arrived at the office and sat down and started work without the layer of background anxiety that had been present every morning for the first 3 weeks. Maya noticed the difference before Lily did. "You're sleeping better," Maya said over breakfast one morning in mid-December. "How do you know? You used to get up at 3 in the morning and make tea. I'd hear the kettle." Maya looked at her over her coffee cup. "You haven't done that in 2 weeks." Lily considered this. "I've been tired." "You've been less afraid," Maya said, with the specific precision of someone who loves you enough to say the accurate thing instead of the comfortable one. Lily didn't argue. She drank her coffee and thought about it, and decided that less afraid and tired were probably both true and not mutually exclusive. The Callaway situation continued in parallel, the way large things continue when they are still in the process of being resolved. Ethan's disclosure to the SEC had opened an investigation that was, according to the coverage, Lily continued to follow with more attention than she entirely admitted to herself, moving through its procedural phases at the specific pace of regulatory processes. Slow, thorough, and occasionally producing a news alert that she read on her phone on the subway with the contained attention of someone who tells herself she is simply following a story she was proximate to. The restructured partnership with Naomi's fund had been formally announced in the 3rd week of November. The coverage was favorable, not uncritically so, but the narrative that emerged was one of a company that had identified a problem, disclosed it fully, and moved forward with corrected documentation and independent oversight. Several analysts who had been negative on Callaway Dynamics upgraded their position. 2 institutional clients who had paused contracts resumed them. Lily had been present, in her professional capacity, for several of the partnership framework meetings between Ethan's team and Naomi's. This was technically the role she'd been placed in. She was the operational link between the 2 organizations, the person who made sure that what was agreed in English translated correctly into what was understood in Japanese, not just linguistically, but contractually, culturally, in the ways that mattered long-term. She was good at this too. She was assembling a more complete picture of him, in the way you assemble pictures of people when you work alongside them, rather than across from them at a dinner table. He was precise in meetings, which she had expected. He was also, which she had not fully expected, genuinely funny, not in the performing way of people who use humor to maintain distance, but in the dry, quiet way of someone who notices the absurdity of things and occasionally lets the observation surface. He had opinions about things outside his field. He read actual books. He was a bad cook, which she knew because he once ate a sad desk lunch of what appeared to be cold rice with something unidentifiable on top of it. And when she said, because she couldn't not, "Is that dinner for you?" he had looked at it with clear-eyed honesty and said, "It might be. I'm not sure what I was going for here." He also, occasionally, said things that landed in her chest and stayed there. In a meeting in early December, one of Naomi's senior associates, a man in his 50s named Kenji, who was careful and thorough and occasionally impatient with what he saw as American imprecision, had challenged a timeline in the restructuring agreement more aggressively than the situation technically warranted. The challenge was partly substantive and partly, Lily recognized, a test of whether Ethan's team would hold their position or fold under pressure from the investor's side. Ethan had held his position, clearly, without aggression, with the specific calibrated confidence of someone who knew exactly where his ground was and stood on it without needing to raise his voice about it. Afterward, walking out of the conference room, Lily had said, half to herself, "That was well handled." He had looked at her sideways. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised," she said. Then honestly, "Maybe a little." "Because of Damien." She looked at him. Because of what happened with Damien, he said. He said it the way he said things about that period. Matter of fact, without performing difficulty or performing recovery, just placing it in the sentence as a fact that existed. You're wondering if I can hold a position when I'm being pressured, specifically by someone on the investor side. Because last time I trusted someone I shouldn't have, and it went through all the way to $83 million before I caught it. She said nothing, because he wasn't wrong. Fair, he said. I'd wonder the same thing. A pause. The difference is that this time I'm reading the contracts myself. She looked at him for a moment. Good, she said. And that was the whole conversation, but it stayed with her for the rest of the day in a way that longer conversations sometimes didn't. The thing that was happening between them, and she was aware something was happening, she was not naive enough or self-deceptive enough to pretend otherwise, was happening in the specific way that things happen when two people are both being careful. Not performing carefulness. Actually careful. Actually paying attention to the edges of things, to the places where it would be easy to step forward and where stepping forward might mean something neither of them had fully thought through. They had coffee together most Wednesdays when she was in the Callaway offices. This had become something without being named. It had simply established itself, the way habits establish themselves when nobody decides to make them, and nobody decides to stop them either. He brought her coffee the second week because he'd been getting himself one and asked. The third week, she'd gotten them both. After that, it had simply become Wednesday coffee, unremarked upon, which was its own kind of remark. They talked about work. They talked about things that were not work, in the way that people do when they have been talking about work for enough hours that the conversation begins to turn toward edges. He told her about Clara's school play, the one he'd missed the previous spring, and how he had, this December, told his assistant to block the afternoon in his calendar 6 weeks in advance and defend it against everything including the partnership closing. Did it hold? Lily asked. It held, he said. She played a snowflake. She had one line. She delivered it with the conviction of someone who believed it was the most important line in the play. Was it the most important line in the play? I have no idea. There were a lot of snowflakes. He was looking at his coffee cup with an expression she had come to recognize, the specific expression of someone describing something that mattered enormously to them and was slightly uncomfortable with how much it showed. She knew I was there. I could see her checking. Every time she came out from backstage, she'd look for me. He stopped. I had missed a lot of things. I was there in the logistical sense. I was present, physically. I just wasn't paying the right attention. Lily was quiet. Clara doesn't hold it against me, he said. She's incapable of holding things against people, which is either extraordinary generosity or she's just 7 and doesn't have the architecture for it yet. A pause. I can't decide which it is. Maybe both, Lily said. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. Maybe both. She had told Maya, after the second Wednesday coffee, that it was a professional relationship. Maya had said, okay. After the fourth, she had said, it's possible it's becoming something more than professional. Maya had looked at her with the patience of someone who had been waiting for exactly this sentence and had enough self-control not to say, I told you so. What are you going to do about it? Maya asked. Nothing, Lily said. He has a daughter and a company that's still stabilizing and a partner who just defrauded him, and I work for his primary investor. Any one of those things is a reason to be careful. And all of them together? All of them together is a reason to be very careful. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, being careful and being nothing aren't the same thing. Lily had thought about this for several days without arriving at a resolution, which was where she still was when, in the third week of December, something happened that moved things out of the category of careful observation and into something less manageable. Ethan called her on a Thursday afternoon, not through Judith, his personal number, the one that said EC in her contacts. I have a situation, he said. No preamble. Clara's sitter called in sick. I have a 2-hour call with the Tokyo team starting in 40 minutes. My backup sitter isn't available. My mother is in Boston. A pause, the pause of a person rapidly running through options. I know this is not appropriate to ask, You can absolutely say no, but you know Japanese business protocol. You know the partnership framework. And Clara is... Another pause, briefer. Clara is not a difficult child. She reads. She watches things on her tablet. She mostly just requires that an adult be physically present. Lily held the phone. Where are you? She said. The office. Is Clara at home? She's here with me. She's in the conference room with her tablet. She's fine currently, but I can't have her in the room for the call. And I can't leave her unsupervised for 2 hours in an office building. And I'll be there in 20 minutes, Lily said. A pause. You're sure? You said she reads. She reads a lot. Then we'll be fine, Lily said. I'll see you in 20 minutes. She was there in 18. Clara Calloway was sitting in the conference room with a tablet and a very large stuffed rabbit. The same rabbit, Lily would realize, that had been in the wallpaper photo on Ethan's phone the night of the Wellington dinner. And she looked up when Lily came in with the direct, assessing gaze of a 7-year-old who had not been prepared to be assessed by in return. She was small for 7 and very dark-eyed, and had a watchfulness about her that was familiar in the way that certain things are familiar when you have spent a lot of time in similar proximity. She looked at people the way Lily looked at people, with the specific attention of someone who had learned early that the information you gathered before speaking was often more useful than anything you'd learn after. Ethan was beside her, jacket back on, the particular look of a man whose 2-hour call was starting in less than 10 minutes, and who was rapidly recalculating the state of his life. Clara, he said, this is Lily. She works with me. She's going to hang out with you while I'm in my call. Clara looked at Lily. Lily looked at Clara. Hi, Clara said. Hi, Lily said. Clara looked at the rabbit in her lap, then at Lily. Do you know what a narwhal is? Lily blinked once. Yes. It's a whale with a tusk. They live in Arctic waters. Some people used to think the tusk was a unicorn horn. Clara's expression shifted, from assessing to something that had more warmth in it, though she kept it controlled in a very 7-year-old way that Lily found almost painful in its recognizability. That's what I thought too, she said. Dad says they're real, but I didn't believe him until I looked it up. Healthy skepticism, Lily said. Clara considered this. Okay, she said, which appeared to be her verdict. Then she moved the rabbit to one side, creating a space on the bench beside her that was exactly the size of a person. Not a large space, but a deliberate one. Ethan, who was watching this exchange with an expression Lily deliberately did not look at too closely, said, I'll be in my office. The call is 2 hours. I'll text if it runs. Go, Lily said. He went. The 2 hours were not what she'd expected, which was that she would sit at a table while Clara watched her tablet, and they would exist in parallel, and she would answer occasional questions. Clara watched her tablet for approximately 25 minutes. Then she asked if Lily wanted to see a book about deep-sea creatures. The book was on her tablet, but there was also a physical version in her backpack because, as Clara explained with the patient logic of someone who has thought about this carefully, screens made your eyes tired. The book was hardcover with large photographs, and Clara had clearly read it many times because she knew where every page was. They went through the book. Clara explained things. Not all of them were accurate. She had some supplementary theories about anglerfish that Lily was fairly sure departed from established science. But she delivered them with complete conviction, and Lily asked questions because the questions were genuine, and because asking questions of a 7-year-old is one of the best uses of time available if you pay attention. Do you speak other languages? Clara asked at some point, somewhere in the middle of the cephalopod section. Japanese, Lily said, and a little French. Not very good French. Japanese has 3 alphabets, Clara said. It does. Hiragana, katakana, and kanji. Which one is the hardest? Kanji. It has thousands of characters. Thousands? Clara processed this. Do you know thousands? Not thousands, maybe a few hundred, enough to read a menu and some contracts. What's a contract? It's a document where people write down what they've agreed to do, so everyone knows and nobody forgets. Clara looked at the book, turned a page. My dad reads contracts all the time now, she said. He has a highlighter. He highlights the parts he wants to remember. That's a good system. He didn't used to do that, Clara said, casually. The way children deliver observations that land with the weight of things they've been carrying without knowing they were carrying them. He used to trust someone else to read them. A pause. That person made bad decisions. Lily kept her face very still. Yeah, she said gently. He did. Clara looked up at her. The dark eyes were direct and entirely clear. Are you the one who found out? Lily held her gaze. I helped, she said. Your dad figured it out. Clara considered this version. He said someone helped him. He didn't say who. He was probably being discreet. What's discreet? Careful about what you say and who you say it to. Clara nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing this away. He smiles more now, she said, than before. Lily said nothing. He used to do this thing, Clara paused, looking for the description, where he would be in the room, but his face would be somewhere else. Like his thoughts were in another place, and they forgot to bring his face with them. She demonstrated this by going briefly vacant in an expression that was so accurate it made Lily's chest tighten. He still does it sometimes, but less. That's good, Lily said carefully. He talks about you, Clara said. Not accusatory, simply factual, the way 7-year-olds are factual when they have decided you are trustworthy enough for the information. Lily was quiet for a moment. What does he say? Clara looked at the deep-sea book, turned another page to a photograph of a mantis shrimp, which had apparently the most sophisticated color vision of any creature on the planet, according to the caption, which Clara read aloud. He says you're the most honest person he knows, Clara said, still looking at the mantis shrimp. He said it to his friend Marcus on the phone. I heard it from the hallway. She looked up, unapologetic. I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose. I was getting water. Lily looked at the mantis shrimp photograph and thought about several things simultaneously. She thought about what it meant that Ethan had said that. She thought about Clara, who had clearly inherited her father's quality of going still when something mattered, and her mother's dark eyes. She thought about a little girl cleaning a photograph frame every week, performing a ritual of care for someone she'd lost before she had language for the loss. You miss your mom, Lily said. She hadn't planned to say it. She said it because it was true, and because something in the room asked for it. Clara's hands on the book went slightly still. I didn't really know her, she said. I was 2. A pause. Dad shows me videos. She was funny. She laughed loud. A pause that was longer and had more inside it. I don't remember the sound, but he describes it. Lily sat with this for a moment. She sounds wonderful, she said. Clara nodded once. She was. Said with the certainty of someone reporting a fact they did not experience directly but have received through the careful testimony of someone who loved them enough to transmit it. They sat together for a while after that, not talking, with the deep-sea book open between them. The city outside the conference room window did its early December evening thing, the sky going that specific purple-gray, the lights beginning to appear in the buildings across the street, the particular quality of dusk in Manhattan that was somehow always both lonely and populated at the same time. Clara fell asleep, not dramatically. She just leaned against Lily's shoulder at some point, with the unself-consciousness of a child who has decided you are safe, and went to sleep. Her breathing changed. The book slid a little in her lap. Lily held very still and didn't move her shoulder. She sat in the conference room on the 18th floor with a sleeping 7-year-old leaning against her and the city going dark outside the window, and thought about the specific shape of this moment. How much was in it? How little of it she had anticipated when she walked into the Wellington Hotel 48 days ago thinking about her sister's tuition and her aching feet. Ethan came in at 6:43. He stopped in the doorway. She looked at him and put one finger briefly to her lips, and he nodded and came in quietly and stood at the edge of the room and looked at his sleeping daughter with an expression that Lily tried not to watch too closely because it was private in the way that a man's feelings about his child are private. The specific raw tenderness of someone who loves another person with a force that occasionally surprised them. He looked at Lily. His expression didn't close exactly. It just shifted slightly from the private thing into something more conscious of being observed. He mouthed, "How long?" She held up 3 fingers, 3 minutes. He nodded, leaned against the doorframe. He had the look of a man at the end of a long day who has walked into something he didn't expect. When Clara stirred a few minutes later and opened her eyes, she looked at Lily first. Then she looked at her father in the doorway. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and picked up the stuffed rabbit from beside her, tucked it against her chest, and leaned back against Lily's shoulder in the specific way of a person who has assessed the situation and found it satisfactory. Ethan looked at this. He looked at it for a long moment with the specific expression of someone witnessing something they didn't know they were hoping for. "Hey, Bug," he said softly. "Good nap?" "Hmm?" Claire's voice was sleep rough. "Lily knows about narwhals." "Does she?" "And contracts." He looked at Lily. Something in his eyes was undone in the way that certain things come undone when you stop holding them very tightly. "I know," he said. He ordered food. He always seemed to default to takeout, which Lily was coming to understand was not laziness, but the specific practicality of a single parent who had long ago made peace with outsourcing the things that weren't load-bearing. Thai food arrived while Clara was washing her hands in the bathroom, and they ate it in the conference room because nobody suggested moving to a restaurant, and the conference room felt by then like a reasonable place to be. Clara ate noodles. She told Ethan about the mantis shrimp and their sophisticated color vision, with the delivery of someone presenting new information to a person who would benefit from having it. Ethan listened with complete attention, which Lily noticed, the genuine full attention, the kind that didn't leak toward phones or windows or the mental background noise of everything else demanding processing. He looked at his daughter while she talked, and he listened. After Clara had been walked to the bathroom again, had retrieved her backpack, had hugged the rabbit, and had fallen asleep in the car Ethan had arranged to take them home, all before he came back upstairs to collect a few things from his office, Lily was putting on her coat in the conference room when he appeared in the doorway again. "Thank you," he said. "She was easy," Lily said. She's a remarkable kid." "Yeah." He said it with the quiet of someone who knows this so deeply it doesn't require elaboration. "She is." He leaned against the door frame. He had his coat in his hand, but he hadn't put it on. "She told me you know about narwhals," he said. "I do." "And contracts." "Also, yes." A pause. Not uncomfortable. The particular pause of two people who have arrived at an edge and are standing at it and both know they are standing at it. He said, "I want to say something, and I'm not—" He stopped. Started again, because apparently the direct version was the only version available. "I've been trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. With He gestured vaguely at the air between them, which was both imprecise and entirely accurate. Lily put her coat on. She did this slowly, which was probably also communication. "What are the options?" she asked. He looked at her. "Professionally, the cleaner thing is to leave it where it is. You work for Naomi. I work with Naomi. The lines are cleaner if we don't—" "Yes," she said. "That's true. But I don't think I'm actually capable of continuing to pretend that Wednesday coffee is just coffee," he said. Flat, direct. The way he said things when he had stopped managing them and just said them. "I've been trying. I'm not succeeding." Lily looked at him. She had been thinking about Maya's voice saying, "Being careful and being nothing aren't the same thing." And she had been thinking about Clara asleep against her shoulder, and she had been thinking about all the rooms she had made herself invisible in and the specific exhaustion of that sustained effort. "The professional situation is complicated," she said. "Yes. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I'm not asking you to. And I'm not—" She stopped. "I haven't done this in a while. Any of this. I don't know how to do this casually. That's not who I am." "I know," he said. And he said it with the specific weight of someone who actually knows, who has been paying attention for long enough to understand what they're saying yes to. "I'm not asking for casual." She looked at him for a long moment. The conference room was quiet. Outside the window, December Manhattan glittered in its cold, indifferent, beautiful way. "Then we should probably talk about it properly," she said. "Not here. Not at the end of a long day in your conference room with Thai food containers on the table." "Okay," he said. A pause. "When?" She thought about her schedule, about the partnership review meeting Thursday, about the Tokyo call Friday morning. about the 100 reasons to be careful, and Maya's voice saying being careful and being nothing aren't the same thing. Saturday, she said. Coffee. Not Wednesday coffee. Different coffee. On purpose. He looked at her. Then he smiled. Properly. Fully. The expression completing itself in a way she had seen building for weeks and was only now arriving. It changed his face substantially. It made him look younger and less armored and slightly like someone who was surprised to find themselves smiling. Saturday, he said. I know a place. She nodded. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door, which meant walking past him, and for a moment they were close in the way of the doorway, and neither of them moved quite as efficiently as they might have, and she looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and the moment was exactly as weighted as it should have been for two people who had just agreed to something they weren't calling anything yet. Good night, she said. Good night, Lily. She walked down the hallway, pressed the elevator button, listened to the elevator arrive and the doors open, stepped inside and turned around. He was still standing in the conference room doorway at the end of the hall, watching her go, his coat still in his hand. The elevator doors closed. She stood in it as it descended 18 floors and thought about Clara saying he smiles more now, and she thought about Naomi saying, you made yourself visible. That required its own courage, and she thought about her father's business and the contracts that had looked like one thing and been another, and she thought about the specific feeling of standing at the Wellington's 14th floor window at 2 a.m. with a business card in her pocket and not knowing yet what it meant. She had not known that it meant this. She was not sure what this was yet. Not exactly, not with the clean definition that frightened people sometimes needed before they could move forward. But the elevator reached the lobby, and the doors opened, and she walked out into the December cold, and she was not frightened. That felt, for now, like enough. She walked to the subway. The city moved around her, enormous and cold and lit from within. She put her hands in her pockets. She thought about Saturday. She walked faster. Saturday arrived with the specific indifference of winter mornings that have no opinion about what you plan to do in them. Lily was up at 7, which was earlier than she needed to be, for reasons she refused to examine too closely. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the street below do its quiet early weekend thing. A man walking a dog, a delivery truck idling on the corner, two people in heavy coats moving fast with their heads down. The particular quality of a city that is technically always awake but has different speeds, and Saturday morning was one of its slower ones. Maya was still asleep. This was a mercy, because Maya would have had opinions about what Lily was wearing and how long she'd been standing at the window and what it meant that she'd made coffee and then forgotten to drink it while she was thinking about other things. She drank the coffee. She thought about other things anyway. She thought about the way the elevator doors had closed with Ethan still standing at the end of the hallway, his coat in his hand, and the particular expression on his face that she'd been assembling and reassembling in her mind for the last 48 hours, like something she kept returning to because she hadn't finished deciding what it meant. She knew what it meant. That was the thing she was really doing at the kitchen window at 7 a.m, not thinking, but finishing the process of admitting what she already knew. Admitting it fully, without the scaffolding of professional caution or reasonable concern, or all the very sensible things she'd been telling herself for the past 6 weeks about lines and complications and timing. She was 30 years old. She had spent the better part of the last 13 years making herself useful and making herself small and making herself invisible in rooms where she was present but not counted. And then one Tuesday night in February, she had opened her mouth and none of that had been possible anymore, and something had been in motion ever since that she had mostly been running to keep up with. She finished her coffee. She went and got dressed without overthinking it, which was its own small victory. The coffee place Ethan had suggested was on the Upper West Side, 15 minutes from his apartment. She knew this because he'd sent the address and she'd looked it up. The way you look up places when you're not sure what kind of morning it's going to be, and you want at least one variable that you understand in advance. It was a small place, not aggressively designed, the kind that had been on the same corner for 20 years, and had regulars who came in with the specific ease of people who know where everything is. Good light. The smell of actual coffee rather than the performance of coffee. A chalkboard menu. Ethan was already there when she arrived. This surprised her. She had expected to be early. She was always early. It was a function of anxiety and respect in roughly equal parts. But he was already at a corner table with 2 cups, which meant he had ordered for her, which meant she had mentioned at some point what she drank, and he had retained it. She wasn't sure when she'd mentioned it. She filed this fact away without comment. He looked up when she came in. He was not wearing a suit. This was the first time she had seen him outside of a professional context, a suit or a well-dressed version of business casual, and the absence of it made him look different in a way she was still calibrating as she crossed the room. Jeans, a dark gray sweater. He looked tired in the ordinary human way rather than the crisis management way, the tiredness of someone who had slept but carries a chronic sleep debt, the kind that accumulates over years of early mornings and late nights, and waking up to check on a child at 2 a.m. "Hey," he said. "Hi." She sat down. The coffee was exactly right, which meant he had paid attention. She held the cup in both hands because the walkover had been cold and her hands hadn't fully recovered. They looked at each other for a moment with the specific awareness of two people who have spent weeks in the shared fiction that Wednesday coffee was just coffee, and are now, without that fiction available, figuring out what the unmediated version of this is. "This is strange," he said. "A little," she agreed. "Not bad, strange." "No, not bad." He nodded. He looked at his coffee cup, then at her. "I didn't sleep well," he said, with the directness of someone who had decided to lead with honesty rather than performance. "I kept thinking about Thursday night and whether I said too much or not enough, or—" "You said the right amount," she said. He looked at her. "You said what was true," she said. "That's the right amount." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't have a very good track record," he said, "of reading situations correctly. I trusted someone for 6 years who was—" He stopped. "I'm not using Damien as an excuse. I'm trying to say that I'm aware I have a specific blind spot around people I've decided to trust. I don't always see things clearly when I've already decided." She understood what he was actually saying underneath the stated thing. "You're warning me," she said. "I'm being honest with you. Those aren't mutually exclusive." He half smiled. "No, they're not." She looked at the window. The street outside was doing its Saturday morning thing, unhurried and gray-skied and entirely unaware of being observed. "I don't trust easily," she said. "That's mine. I've been careful for so long that I sometimes can't tell the difference anymore between caution and just being afraid of something going wrong." She looked at him. "That's not a reason not to try. I'm just naming it because you named yours." He was looking at her with the full attention she had come to understand was one of his most consistent qualities. The way he listened without filling the space, without performing engagement, just actually receiving what was being said. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a resolution of everything complicated about the situation. The professional overlap, the specific vulnerability of two people who had both been broken in different ways and were still, quietly, in the process of reassembly. It was just two people agreeing to try something that scared them. They drank their coffee. They talked. Not about work. They made a loose and unspoken agreement somewhere in the first 10 minutes that this morning was not about work, and held it. He told her about growing up in Philadelphia, the youngest of 3 brothers, a mother who taught high school English and had opinions about every book he'd ever brought home, a father who fixed cars on weekends and communicated primarily through acts of practical service rather than words. He said this last thing with a smile that was complicated and fond, in the way that feelings about parents usually are. She told him about Osaka, about the specific quality of the neighborhood where she'd grown up, the narrow streets and the market 2 blocks from their apartment, and the way her father would take her and Maya to the waterfront on Sunday mornings when the weather was good. She told him about coming back to the United States at 15, the specific disorientation of returning to a place that was technically home but felt foreign, the way she'd used language, the fluency, the precision of moving between 2 linguistic worlds, as a way of making herself necessary in rooms where she would otherwise have been simply a teenager who didn't quite fit. He listened to all of it. He didn't try to fix any of it or offer the consoling framework that people sometimes offered when they were uncomfortable with other people's hard history. He just listened. "You've been necessary for a long time," he said when she'd finished. "In the background, making things work." "Yes." "That's exhausting." "It is," she said. "I didn't know how exhausting until I stopped." He looked at her steadily. "Are you still stopping?" She thought about it honestly. I'm learning to, she said. It doesn't feel natural yet, but I'm trying. Outside, it had started to snow. Not heavily, light, thin flakes, the kind of early December snow that wasn't going to stick but wanted to make its intentions known. The street outside the coffee shop window whitened slightly at the edges, and the people passing on the sidewalk hunched their shoulders a fraction deeper into their coats. They both noticed it at the same time and both looked at the window. Clara's going to lose her mind, he said. Does she love snow? She treats every snowfall like a personal gift. Last year she made me come outside at 11 at night because it was snowing, and she said we had to see it right then because by morning it might be different. He looked at the window with the expression of someone replaying a memory they have categorized as important. We stood on the sidewalk outside our building in our pajamas and our coats for about 10 minutes just watching it come down. A pause. She was right. It was different by morning. Lily looked at the snow falling outside the window. She thought about a man in his pajamas and a small girl with dark eyes standing on a sidewalk at 11 at night watching snowfall. She thought about the specific courage of that, of a person who has buried a wife and raised a child alone and nearly lost everything he built, choosing to stand on a cold sidewalk in the dark because his daughter had correctly identified that the moment was worth showing up for. She had been wrong, she thought, when she first looked across the Wellington dining room and saw a man who had buried himself in work to avoid being anywhere else. She had been partly right. He had done that. But it was not the whole picture. The whole picture was more complicated and more human than the outline of it. He was trying. He was doing it imperfectly and with full awareness of the imperfection, and he was doing it anyway. She understood this very well. January came. The Damian Pierce trial, or rather the pretrial process, which was where things actually existed for now, moved through its procedural phases with the regularity of something that had been set in motion and would complete itself on its own schedule, regardless of the emotional weight any individual attached to the outcome. Lily gave her formal statement to Ethan's legal team in the first week of January, in a conference room that was not the Wellingtons, with an attorney named Serena, who was thorough and specific and treated Lily's account with the seriousness of someone who understood it was the kind of account that matters at the margins. Afterwards, Serena had said, "Your recall of the contract's language is unusually precise." Lily had said, "I read carefully." Serena had looked at her. "You do," she'd said, and there was something in it that went beyond the legal observation. The formal investigation confirmed what the initial audit had suggested. Damian had been manipulating Callaway Dynamics' financial documentation for approximately 14 months, beginning during a period when Ethan was managing a family medical crisis related to Clara, a hospitalization, brief but serious, that had consumed Ethan's attention and created the specific window that Damian had used to make changes he believed would never be traced back to him specifically. When Ethan told Lily this, not in a professional context but one evening over the takeout that had become a loose and unannounced habit, Clara asleep in the next room, he said it with the particular flatness of a person who has already processed the worst of something and is now simply reporting it. "He knew I was distracted," Ethan said. "He timed it." "Yes, she was in the hospital for 4 days. Appendix, she was fine. She was fine. It wasn't—" He stopped. "But I was there every day. Every night. I was not thinking about the company." He knew that. Lily said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about the specific cruelty of that, the deliberate targeting of a window created by a father's fear for his child, and she was finding that she did not have the language to name how angry it made her, which meant it was the kind of anger that lived below language. "Does Clara know?" she asked. "No, she knows Damian made bad decisions. She doesn't know the details." "Good." He looked at her. "You think that's right? Not telling her?" "She's 7, Lily said. "There's time to understand that the world has people in it who do this. She doesn't need to understand it yet." She paused. "What she needs to understand is that when you found out, you didn't hide it. You fixed it. She'll know that part." He was quiet. "You think she pays attention to that?" he said. "She pays attention to everything," Lily said. "I spent 2 hours with her, and I know that she pays attention to everything." She looked at him. "She told me you smile more now." He looked at her with an expression that was undone in a particular way. She told me you told her that, he said. She volunteered it. I didn't ask. He exhaled slowly. He looked at the takeout containers on the coffee table, and the city outside the window, and then at Lily, and the look had in it everything that the previous weeks had been accumulating toward. All the careful Wednesday coffee, and the honest conversations, and the snow, and Clara's rabbit, and the moment in the elevator doorway. I know the situation is complicated, he said. The professional Ethan. He stopped. I talked to Naomi, Lily said. He blinked. About us. She said the word plainly, without hedging. About whether it was a problem for my role. He was looking at her with full attention. What did she say? Lily thought about the phone call, about Naomi's silence on the other end of the line, the specific quality of it, not disapproval, something more considered, and then her voice when she finally spoke. Miss Harper, I hired you because of your judgment. I expect that judgment to extend to your personal life. If you are asking whether I consider your private relationship with Mr. Calloway a conflict of interest, the answer is not inherently. What would be a conflict is if it affected your work. Does it? Lily had said, no, I intend to make sure it doesn't. Naomi had said, then I don't see a problem. I do see, however, that you are asking me permission for something that is yours to decide, which suggests you may still be in the habit of making yourself small. Work on that. She told Ethan the relevant part of this, not the last sentence, which was between her and Naomi, but the substance of it. He listened. When she finished, he said, you talked to her before telling me. I needed to know the professional situation was clear before I could think about the rest of it without that in the way. He absorbed this. That's very... He paused, and she could see him looking for the right word, not the easy one. That's very you, he said finally, taking care of the structure before you let yourself want anything. She looked at him. Is that a criticism? No, he said, firmly. It's not. A pause. It's just... I want you to know that you're allowed to want things first, before you've secured all the exits. He held her gaze. You don't have to earn it. The apartment was quiet. The city outside was doing its January thing, cold and bright and permanent. Claire was asleep down the hall with her rabbit and her deep-sea book and her specific serious attention to the world. Lily thought about her father, about what it had cost him to trust the wrong thing, and how that cost had traveled forward in time and shaped the person she had become. The carefulness, the invisibility, the elaborate architecture of reduced expectation that she had constructed and lived inside for a decade, because it was safer than being someone who wanted things fully and might lose them. She thought about what it meant to inherit someone else's wound, to carry it without knowing you're carrying it until the specific moment when something makes you set it down. She said, I'm working on it. He said, I know. And then neither of them said anything for a while, and the silence was the good kind. The kind that doesn't need filling, that holds things comfortably rather than requiring them to be named before they were ready. He reached across the couch and took her hand, carefully, without drama, the way you touch something you don't want to startle. She let him. She thought, this is what it feels like. Not the Hollywood version, not the resolved version where everything difficult has been cleaned up and set aside. The actual version, complicated history and professional caution, and a sleeping child down the hall, and two people who were both still figuring out how to be less afraid. The actual version, with all of it still present, and choosing it anyway. The snow came back in February, not the thin, decorative snow of December. February snow was a different beast. Serious, committed, the kind that had an opinion about itself. It came on a Tuesday, which Lily noticed because Tuesdays had held a specific weight in her internal calendar since the dinner at the Wellington almost exactly a year before, and it came heavily and continuously for most of the day. Until by evening, the city had been substantially rearranged into something that looked temporarily cleaner than it actually was. She was at Ethan's apartment when it started. She was there most Tuesday evenings now, and some Saturdays, and Clara had stopped being surprised by this and had begun operating on the assumption that Lily was a fixture, which she communicated through the specific behavioral shift of children who have decided someone is permanent. She left books on Lily's side of the couch. She asked Lily's opinion on things. She once, without preamble or explanation, began showing Lily her drawings the way you show someone your work when you trust that they'll look at it properly. The drawing had been of a narwhal, a very good narwhal. Lily had said so, specifically with the specificity of someone who meant it rather than the vague warmth of an adult performing appreciation for a child's work. Clara had accepted this with the gravity of an artist receiving a considered review. "The tusk is hard," she said. "I did it 4 times. "The 4th one worked," Lily said. "I know," Clara said, unapologetic, accurate. On the Tuesday, the snow came back. They were all 3 in the living room when the city outside went from raining to snowing in the sudden way it sometimes did. The change visible through the window, the precipitation shifting, the street beginning to whiten. Clara saw it immediately. She was off the couch before anyone spoke, pressing both hands to the glass, her breath fogging it. "It's snowing," she announced, as though they might have missed it. "We see it," Ethan said. "Real snow." She turned around. Her expression had the quality it got when she had decided something was required. "We have to go out." "It's 8:30. "So?" Ethan looked at Lily. Lily looked at the snow coming down outside, thick and unhurried and entirely committed to itself. She looked at Clara, who was already pulling away from the window and looking for her coat with the urgency of someone for whom the correct response to a snowfall at 8:30 was obviously to go outside in it. She thought about 2 people standing on a sidewalk in their pajamas at 11 at night watching snowfall and being right about it. "She's right," Lily said. Ethan looked at her. "She's right," Lily said again. "We should go out." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had come to know very well, the one that was almost a smile, building toward one, the expression of someone who is being surprised by a version of their life they hadn't planned on, and finding that the surprise is entirely welcome. "Okay," he said. They got their coats. Clara was already at the door, bundled in the specific, inefficient way of children who dress themselves, her coat half-buttoned, her hat on sideways, her scarf wrapped twice around her neck as though insulation was achieved through redundancy. Ethan fixed the hat. She suffered this with minimal protest. They went outside. The snow was coming down in the large, soft way that February snow sometimes managed, the flakes the size of something deliberate, landing on the sidewalk and the parked cars and the tops of the streetlights and the shoulders of their coats. The street was quiet in the specific way of city streets in the middle of snowfall, the usual noise absorbed and replaced by the muffled quality of a world being patted against itself. Clara immediately walked out to the middle of the sidewalk and tipped her head back to catch snowflakes with her tongue, which was entirely standard and also somehow, to Lily, unbearably moving in the way that small, pure joys are moving when you are standing beside them. Ethan came to stand next to Lily. Their shoulders were touching. Neither of them moved away from it. "You know what I was thinking about today?" he said. "What?" "A year ago," he said, more or less. He was looking at Clara, still turned toward the sky, arms slightly out, entirely unbothered by the cold. "I was in that room at the Wellington, and I was trying to save a company that I didn't know my partner was already in the process of destroying. I was watching the whole thing fall apart, and I could not see clearly enough to know what I was actually looking at." A pause. "And then you stepped forward." "I poured water for 2 hours first," Lily said. He almost laughed. "Yeah, you did." He looked at her, the snow coming down around them, the streetlight catching it. "I didn't see you." "Nobody sees waitstaff," she said. "That's by design." "I should have seen you." She looked at him. "You see me now." He held her gaze. "I do," he said, simply, fully. The way he said things when he meant them completely. She thought about all of it. About the Thursday morning phone call when she was 17. About Maya's organic chemistry textbook and the tuition due in 11 days. About Naomi's hand stopping on the contract page. About stepping forward in the Wellington dining room with her heart going hard in her chest and her hands shaking and the specific knowledge that she could not stay where she was anymore. About all the invisible rooms and all the plates carried and all the years of making herself necessary in the background while the main events happened to other people. About Naomi saying you made yourself visible. That required its own courage. About Maya saying being careful and being nothing aren't the same thing. About Clara and the narwhal drawing and the deep sea book. And he smiles more now, and a small serious girl wiping a photograph frame every week because nobody taught her to, and she did it anyway. About what it meant that here she was standing on a snow-covered sidewalk on a Tuesday in February, which was a Tuesday that felt nothing like the Tuesday a year ago, and also felt, underneath, like the same movement continuing, the step forward she had taken in the Wellington dining room continuing to carry her forward into rooms she hadn't known were waiting. Clara stopped catching snowflakes and turned around and looked at both of them standing there on the sidewalk. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. She asked it the way she asked most things, directly with genuine curiosity, without the social scaffolding that adults built around questions to make them feel safer. Lily looked at her. "I was thinking," she said, "that this is a very good snowfall." Clara regarded this answer seriously. "It is," she agreed. Then, with the authority of someone delivering an assessment she had earned, "It's one of the best ones." She turned back to the snow, satisfied. Ethan's hand found Lily's beside him. Not a declaration, not a performance, just there, in the specific warmth that two hands can make in the cold. She held it. The snow kept coming down. The city received it to the way cities received snow. Ungracefully, practically, with the knowledge that by morning the bus routes would be complicated and the sidewalks would be gray-black slush, and the temporarily beautiful version of this would give way to the ordinary version that people lived in. But that was morning. That was the practical world doing its practical work. Right now it was 8:45 on a Tuesday in February, and the snow was falling in the large, soft, unhurried way of something that had decided to take its time, and a 7-year-old girl with dark eyes was standing in the middle of a New York sidewalk with her arms out and her hat still slightly sideways and her face turned up toward the sky like she was owed this and knew it. And two people who had both spent a long time learning to want less were standing on a sidewalk in the cold holding hands and finding, carefully and without pretending it was something other than what it was, that the wanting was not the dangerous part. The dangerous part was staying inside. The dangerous part was pouring water quietly in the corner while the important things happened at other tables, to other people, and telling yourself that was where you belonged. Lily had stepped away from that table a year ago. She had done it afraid and uncertain and with her hands shaking, and she had done it anyway, and the chain of things that had followed, Naomi and the office with the plant and Maya's face on the morning she'd said yes, and Clara's narwhal drawing, and this sidewalk in this snow, was not a reward for the courage. It wasn't a lesson neatly packaged. It was just what happened when you stopped holding yourself closed. Things came in. She looked at the snow coming down and felt the cold air on her face, and felt Ethan's hand in hers, and felt, underneath all of it, something that was not happiness exactly. She was not a person who dealt in unqualified happiness. There was too much still unresolved, too much still in process, too many ordinary difficult things still ahead. But something more durable than happiness, something that felt like ground under her feet. Clara turned around. She looked at Lily specifically, with the dark-eyed directness that Lily had come to understand was simply the way she looked at people she had decided to keep. "Are you going to come to my school thing?" she asked. "In March, we're doing a science presentation about ocean animals." She paused, with the timing of someone who had inherited something. "I'm doing narwhals." Lily looked at her. She looked at Ethan, who was watching with the expression of a man who was watching his daughter ask someone a question that was not really about a science presentation, and knew it and loved both of them for it. She looked back at Clara. "Yes," she said. "I'll be there." Clara absorbed this with the nod of someone confirming what they had expected to hear. "Good," she said, and turned back to the snow. Ethan exhaled beside Lily. Not in relief. In the specific way of someone setting something down that they have been holding carefully for a long time. Something fragile, something they were afraid they'd drop. Setting it down and finding that the table holds. The snow kept falling. The three of them stood on the sidewalk in it. Nobody suggested going inside.